What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments, and also check the description box to original creator of this beautiful creation. Naruto was unsure of where he was, and in terrible pain. He felt like he had landed into water in the midst of a spin, and it was already burning at his lungs, and then, he realized it was no water, and he did not have the slightest idea which way is up. It hurt, though, and Naruto was desperately trying to get out of wherever he was, to right himself, but he had lost sight of the seal, of everything. He felt lost, gone in the nothingness surrounding him, utterly alone. Pain and desperation were his old friends, but it was one thing to be in pain, and an entirely different experience to exist in a world where there was nothing but the agony itself, crashing through him like tidal waves. Nothing else mattered, nothing else existed. Naruto was starting to lose any semblance of conscious thought, and almost slipped away, but then he suddenly found it. A connection, something that was both near and far from him, yet resonated inside of him, familiar. There was a seal there, one he had lost before and had found again. He latched onto that chance, and in his desperation he held tight, dragging himself to his target. The world washed into being around him as he slammed into something big and hairy, and there was a thunderous rumble. The pain in his body intensified even more, and he let out a scream. It felt like an unstoppable force was trying to tear him apart, to wrest something out of him. It took him only moments to connect the dots. Kurama. Naruto saw a swimming mess of colors before his eyes, heard a loud, angry roaring that was deafening him, and his sense of smell was overwhelmed by the ferrous aroma of drying blood and wet fur. The world was there, but it was veiled by the agony of his arrival. Something had gone terribly wrong. The force tearing the Kyuubi out of him was too strong to fight. It was an impossible struggle. Even while trying to preserve a hair's breadth of chakra, he couldn't help but lose more and more of it, rushing across his feeble resistance. It was like trying to stop a landslide with his bare hands. He could feel the distinct hum of strange fuinjutsu. That could not have been anything good. With his senses still in disarray, he could only guess at their intended function, or even their user. The chakra that was released pulsed powerfully at the edge of his senses, eerily familiar. Could it be some sort of barrier, to prevent his escape, perhaps? For an irrational moment, Naruto's thoughts wandered to the Akatsuki, to their attempt at stealing all the tailed beasts, and use them as weapons of war. Had someone taken over their mantle at last, when peace was finally within reach? Had he been ensnared for the same terrible purpose as Gaara had been? Kurama bellowed something incoherent inside his mind, and even as Naruto tried to hold his companion inside with the best he could muster, the chakra was slipping away. His attempts to respond failed quickly. There was no talking with the bundle of confusion and pain that scratched at the bars of its one-time prison. The energies of Kyuubi no Yuko enveloped him with a yellow glow, sending the chakra into him in a waterfall of power. Kurama was scared, Naruto realized. Scared of something so much that it couldn't help but frighten the Jinchuriki too. Just where had he ended up? Naruto ground his teeth and tried to move, but he seemed to be stuck, tied to a growling gigantic creature with some kind of chakra bonds, the Kyuubi. But not the same Biju that he felt leaking away. Glowing silver chains held him and the other Kyuubi locked in place. How could it be that he still felt Kurama inside him, yet it was out here, almost free? Was this how much of the nine-tailed beast he had already lost? Naruto shifted as he brought all the power he could muster to bear, snapping the silver bonds with a surge of fury, sending 1,000 ripples down the chains. The links were snapping everywhere around him, washing the field with a cascading sound of thousands of tinkling bells. The silver chakra shattered and fell apart in the heavy rain. Freed of his bonds, Naruto started falling, and at that very moment he felt the incredible draining sensation increase tenfold. Kurama's chakra layer was peeled off suddenly, leaving only singed skin beneath. His face and stomach had taken the worst from the vicious chakra, charred skin tearing with the smallest movement, blood pouring from the wounds. Naruto howled from the pain, but he refused to give in. He tried to twist mid-air, but he could not manage it, and fell heavily onto his side. There was a snap as one or more bones in his left arm broke. With all the pain his body was going through anyway, it seemed more like a minor inconvenience than a true injury. Kurama? Naruto called then, desperate. What is going on? Where are we? The huge Biju shook itself, throwing off all the bits and pieces of the chain away like a dog shakes away the rain. Then, still growling, it gave Naruto a questioning glance, jaws wide open, showing a display of sharp teeth as it drew in a heavy breath of air. It seemed that Kurama was pretty confused. It even showed some signs of inner struggle, and Naruto had no idea if that was going to work in his favor. At least the Biju wasn't actively trying to kill him. Yet, what did you do? A man's panicked voice shouted from a small distance away. It's going to escape. Naruto turned on his heel to face the new arrival, and froze in his tracks. Impossible. It was like looking in a mirror, save for the lack of whiskers. The man before him had blonde hair like his own, its length easily matching Naruto's, the bright strands standing out without any distinguishable pattern. Their builds were very similar too, and the way they had moved into a ready position had been synchronous to the smallest second. If their clothes had matched, he was sure that no one could tell the difference without careful examination. Naruto was clad in his usual black and orange, chest shining through the handful of burns in his jumper, and the cloth was painted with red blood, his own blood. The man across from him wore something dark blue and green, and it could have been a modified Jonin uniform, but for one glaring difference. A distinctive white coat hung over everything else, billowing in the wind, making red flame-like highlights at the outer edge jump in and out of sight. Even though Naruto could not see it, he knew that on the back, there were kanji claiming that the man in question was none other than the fourth Hokage. His father. Oh, crap. The look they spared each other was short, but Naruto took that moment to take in his father's face, which he had doubted he would ever see again beyond the carving in the mountain. He looked young, yet already experienced, at the very prime of his life. His shock was matched by the surprise shining on his father's face. But there was something off about it. Something dark shone in Namikaze Minato's eyes, too. Mistrust, anger, fear and desperation. They were filled with darkness. Edo Tensei, Naruto said to himself, struck by the horrified realization, what else could it be? He put his hands in a clone seal before he really thought about it further. His left arm still hurt, but was already mending. Not all the Kyuubi's power had left him yet. He bit his lip in worry as he reasoned that trying to speak with Kurama and beating down a perversion of his father's image could prove nearly impossible in his rapidly weakening state. He had to act quickly, before he lost all the chakra he had left. Don't come any closer, he exclaimed, hoping that Minato would listen to him. The impure resurrection allowed the victims a measure of will and control, after all. Toju Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. A tide of orange, black and red arose around him on the battlefield. Many hundreds of clones, some perched on the Kyuubi itself, even. Kurama couldn't have looked more surprised, and neither could the fourth. Such power, you must work for that man, Minato said, anger rising in his voice. What are you, some sort of doppelganger, using genjutsu? The man did not wait for an answer, throwing a spread of kunai in a wide arc towards the vast army of clones, shouting his next words loudly, so they would carry further. Kushina, take care of Naruto. Naruto faltered at the yell, and it felt like his blood froze. Kushina? They had resurrected her, too? No, that did not make sense, nor the reference to himself, at that. Suddenly, nothing made sense. At that moment, memories flooded into his mind. A clone's memories of an exhausted woman that was somewhere behind the fourth. She was covering a small baby with her body, standing weakly on trembling feet, yet with an expression of unmatched determination. There were loose ends of chains hanging from her back, slowly decaying into nothingness, the very chakra chains he had snapped. It was at that moment of complete shock, when his clones started to fall. Breaking free of whatever confusion had grasped it before, Kurama sprang into action. Its gigantic jaws closed on a dozen clones, tearing them to pieces until they popped, and it howled in fury. Those that had climbed onto the fox's back were the first to die, and it took only moments before the other clones reacted, retaliating for the slaughter. The Kyuubi's short hesitation at the coordinated response played to the clone army's favor, as their sheer numbers quickly overwhelmed it, darting between the legs, hiding behind the ears, and trying to cause as much confusion as possible. With Naruto, of course, the potential for chaos was enormous. Kurama screamed out of rage when one brave clone started pulling at its whiskers, as dozens tackled its legs and forced it down. While the clones took care of keeping the fox busy, Naruto focused on possibly an even greater threat, the fourth Hokage reaped through the field of Naruto's like a god of war, with two of his three-pronged kunai flashing so quickly that there was barely enough time for a warning before he was gone again. He seemed to be anywhere and everywhere, slaughtering by the dozens. This was the man who had once killed most of an army by his lonesome, and it showed. As soon as Naruto realized that his father could appear before him at any moment, and would be as merciless as he was to the clones, he knew he had to try and defend himself. He was good, incredibly so. Even Guy had praised Naruto's recent improvements in taijutsu training. But his father was bordering on ridiculous, sometimes called the best shinobi the Leaf had ever produced. His father easily evaded any of the hits that his clones attempted to deliver, and his kunai were dealing deadly blows, and he had not even used his Rasengan yet. The only things that could stop someone like that were the strongest jutsu that Naruto knew, but he was afraid to use some of those, knowing their destructive potential. A Rasen Shuriken might have ended things, but would more than likely kill if it made contact. "Stop!" a clone shouted in a panic as the fourth appeared right next to him, and his eyes widened at the flashing kunai. "We don't need to." He disappeared in a puff of smoke as the metal pierced his throat. His father continued his relentless assault, deaf to the continued pleas of Naruto's clones, and Naruto tried to figure out a way to end this, to at least force a conversation. It seemed that the fourth was convinced that he was caught in some sort of genjutsu targeted against him, or something similar. Well, he would have thought the same thing in reverse, Naruto realized. But, if his hypothesis was right, and it seemed ever more likely, even if it was still insane, then this was neither genjutsu nor Edo Tensei. Kurama howled in rage as it headed towards the remnants of the barrier, shrugging off the chains and clones that kept it down. It was a slow process since the creature seemed to be confused, and it took its time to eat stray clones along the way, biting at them with a fevered look in its eyes. Naruto summoned a few hundred more clones, to the astonishment of the fourth, and sent them over to help out his failing hordes. He was getting awfully acquainted with how it felt to be eaten by a monstrous biju, Naruto realized with a shudder. So far, the best result of calling the fox Kurama had been it taking extra care to eat the clones in question. It was as if it had no idea who he was. Naruto's clones had found the barrier not far from their current battleground. It was something that the fourth had to have prepared in advance, the very same fuinjutsu he felt going up moments after his arrival. It was strong enough to hold the Kyuubi back for a couple of minutes, or even withstand an impact of a single biju bomb. It would not be enough for a prolonged assault, however, and the fox would break through. Even more interesting than the barrier was the few clones reporting pillars of smoke rising from the distance, where he saw the contour of familiar mountains. Naruto was sure just where exactly he was, on one of the outer training grounds of Konoha, even though there were some differences with the one he remembered. This was no Edo Tensei, it was something entirely different. Naruto shuddered in realization and he felt a pang of fear. Could all this be the result of using Hiraishin with Kyuubi's chakra? His father was here, and his mother, and the unleashed Kyuubi, and Konoha was burning. This could not be a coincidence. His use of his father's signature skill had to have launched with him into the past, and that explained Kurama's silence. Kurama was chakra itself, and it already existed in this time and place. Only one of the two would prevail, and his own came here weakened, drained of its chakra. Whatever struggle went on between his own fox and the free one, he feared that he knew who was winning. Naruto grit his teeth as he focused on the battlefield, ready for his best attempt at dodging the very jutsu that had landed here. If he could not convince his father to stop attacking, or force the Kyuubi back, he would run out of chakra within minutes, both his own and that of the fox. That had never happened to him, and there was a pretty good chance that he would die. Out of desperation, he forced a couple of clones to jump to safer places, hide and remain still, gathering chakra in case he would desperately need it. Whether or not he would die here, he could not destroy history. As he considered the vanishing of his own Kurama, Naruto's eyes widened. He turned to the only person inside the barrier that could help him, the one person who had experienced the very same only hours before. He appeared before his mother by himself, with his hands stretched to the sides, open palms towards her. It was a way to show he held no weapons, willfully opening himself to attack. Kushina looked so tired, so worn out, that Naruto's first instinct had been to close the short distance and hug her. But he couldn't do that, Naruto reminded himself, since she might well stab him in that moment, expecting him to be an enemy. So he held back, slowly sinking to the floor besides her. "Mom," he muttered without giving it much thought. Kushina faltered, and her hands dropped. She had been preparing some sort of jutsu when she saw his eyes, and heard his trembling voice. Her harsh expression wavered and she did a double take. "You." Naruto nodded slowly. "Naruto? You look so much like him. Like Minato." She glanced back at the little child she held in her arms, then stared back at the adult Naruto's face, and collapsed to her knees with a sob. How is this possible?" Behind them, a clone managed to catch the fourth by emerging from the ground, and he was followed by a dozen others. Some managed to catch the Hokage by the hem of his cloak, trying to restrict the movements as much as possible, hoping that one could live long enough to deliver a message. However, the yellow flash proved far too fast, and too merciless. He swerved, evading the piling Naruto's clones, drew out another kunai and he saw Naruto crouched right next to Kushina. This time, the Hiraishin was even faster than before, leaving only the white cloak under a huge pile of Naruto clones. The Kyuubi stepped on them all, popping them like a large balloon, and it snarled in anger as hundreds more still clung to it, preventing its escape. The fourth Hokage appeared at Kushina's side soundlessly and with his three-pronged kunai already slashing at Naruto's throat with the speed of lightning. "No, Minato!" Kushina shouted, and her arm flashed out to catch her husband's. The blade glanced Naruto's neck, freezing but a briefest moment before tearing it apart, and it drew but a trickle of blood. Naruto was afraid to breathe. He felt the edge very clearly, the cold steel staying perfectly still. "This is the real you," Minato said, rage shining in his eyes. "Why should I spare Minato?" Kushina cried out, clasping her hand around his wrist. Look, this is Naruto." The rage which had held a firm hold on Minato since this strange new arrival had torn the Kyuubi out of the Kushina's bonds finally receded. He looked again at Naruto, his eyes narrowing as he took in the similarities and differences, glancing down at the little child in Kushina's arms. "Prove it," he said. He drew back the kunai, doubt and concern ringing in his voice. Kurama's monstrous laughter broke through the momentary silence, tearing up hordes of Naruto clones as it broke free of the last few chains of chakra that still remained, and Kushina slumped. It would be mere minutes before he broke through Minato's barrier as well. Naruto glanced at the battle, realizing the short time he had, and raised a hand up, forming a perfect sphere of the Rasengan, a swirling whirlpool of blue chakra. Minato blinked, jaws slackening, and he nodded in recognition. Then he stepped forward, and enveloped Naruto in a desperate hug. "Hey, watch the Rasengan." Naruto managed to dismiss the attack at the very last second, and sagged into the hug, relieved. It took him only a moment to realize that Minato was laughing under his breath, and he reared back to stare at his son, now an adult. "How?" Minato asked then, as Kushina took her own turn in hugging Naruto, the tinier version of him clinging to her side, crying. The hug was considerably weaker than his father's, since Kushina was moving only due to her iron will. "I've used Hiraishin," Naruto explained quickly. "I think I might have used a bit too much chakra." "You look like you're my age. How on earth did you get that much?" Minato clicked his tongue once, eyes lighting up in recognition. "I sealed Kyuubi into you, didn't I? You used its chakra for the jutsu. That would do it." Naruto nodded in confirmation. "But something went wrong, obviously. Whatever happened, it did something to my seal. Kurama, it's like he's being torn from me." As if on cue, Kyuubi roared, growing a little, and Naruto almost fell down, his legs wobbling. "See?" he muttered weakly. "That's how it's been getting stronger." Minato said, grimacing. "I can't seal him if he's moving around like that, and can you imagine what Kyuubi could do with twice its usual chakra? Do we even need to seal him?" Naruto asked urgently. "Kurama and I have had an understanding, if you will. If he would just listen to me." He took a heavy breath and summoned nearly 100 more clones to rush back towards the Kyuubi. The jutsu took a heavy toll this time, and Naruto almost collapsed from the strain, taking a few painful breaths before he worked himself back up. "He just isn't listening. It's like he's gone mad." "You want to talk to that thing?" Kushina asked. "Are you sure it is possible for you to reason with him?" "When I spoke to it." Kushina shuddered. "I can't imagine you made a deal with a creature like this, did you?" No, Naruto admitted finally, just as the memories of a clone being bitten in half returned. Kurama. He was hateful, but it was getting better. We were a Jinchuriki and a Biju, sharing a body. It was, not bad. Whether or not it can be reasoned with, it's clearly not in any state for it now, Minato observed. Sealing this, Kurama is our only chance, right now. We're too exhausted to even look for any other solutions. Since you managed to learn to get along with him, what is it to say that it cannot happen again, given enough time? If that ever happens, the seal could be opened. Minato sighed. Although, I need Kyuubi to be still for a few seconds to seal him, and that's getting harder. I won't have a second chance. Kushina. Can you call the chains again? Kushina shook her head weakly. No, not even if I used all I have left. I am not sure I even could make the chakra chain stick anymore, I'm out of juice. She shook. Maybe you should just risk it with a moving Kyuubi? It's better than nothing. The Kyuubi slammed 3 clones to the ground right then, before they even finished the first phase of the Rasen Shuriken. Another 3 had to flee to the different sides before getting crushed too. It was looking increasingly hopeless, now that reinforcements were no longer coming. There's no need. There is one thing that has worked for me in the past, Naruto said as he stood up straighter. It might give you a good chance to use the Shiki Fusion, but, please, let me be the one to use it. I know all the hand seals I need too, and with you two alive. No, Minato echoed together with Kushina. He reached out and grasped Naruto's shoulder, staring into his son's eyes. I always knew that you would be meant for great things. Jiraiya-sensei was convinced of it, too. And the sacrifice you are offering is a proof of how fantastic you are. But you won't die today, Naruto. I would not be worth anything if I allowed you to take my place in this. It is a father's duty to care for their children, isn't it? I understand, Naruto nodded, looking down at the ground. A Hokage has to care for their village and their family first, right, not his own life. I wish there was another way. I wish I could get to know you. As you say, it is my duty. We can't have the Kyuubi wreaking havoc everywhere. You probably know what happened to Konoha. That could happen anywhere. He paused, narrowing his eyes. Do you know of the masked man? Naruto nodded glumly. Then you know why I do this. We can't kill the Kyuubi, so the only way is to hide him, seal him once again, because we will need that power in the future. The village will need it again. I can tell from your expression that you realize this too. Naruto sighed and focused. The clones he had sent out before had enough time to gathering the necessary amount of natural energy for his last strategy. Minato smiled at his son when he saw the distinct sage eyes forming. Toad-like, they shone strangely in the night, the skin darkening around them with dark pigmentation. You're a toad sage, Minato said with visible pride and astonishment. Like Jiraiya, you're his student too? Yup, and it's not quite like the pervert sages. It's better, Naruto croaked in answer, and he smiled weakly. Be ready when I leave an opening. I'm going to tear that fox a new one. Believe it. He dashed forward, calling up a few clones as he went. All the remaining clones gathered between the barrier and Kurama, each and every one of them raising a hand in the air, pouring the last remnants of Kyuubi's chakra and mixing it up with natural energy. Multiple Rasengans flickered to life, and they were rapidly growing bigger and brighter. The horde leapt forward, shouting, Senpo, Chudama Rasen Terengen. The Kyuubi jumped back from the attack, seemingly realizing its enormous power, but it was not fast enough to evade the storm. The seemingly endless barrage of Rasengans enchanted with sage chakra was devastating in its effectiveness as a gigantic explosion of chakra blew in all directions, the shock wave rippling through the air. Kurama was thrown back, its huge bulk rolling over a few times and smashing against the mountainside. The unstoppable force of the explosions leveled trees and shredded deep trenches in the ground, sending wood and earth in every direction. It even managed to wound the fox. Patches of fur went flying towards the sky. Deep wounds were visible for a few moments before they closed over again. The Kyuubi lay there for a few moments, utterly dazed. Minato rushed through his seal array. The fox was confused, but in no way subdued for long. As the dust settled, he finally completed his jutsu. Shiki Fujin, he said as a final note, summoning the specter of the death god to hover just above him in its shadowy presence. He alone could see the monstrous creature. Pale and grotesque, the Shinigami looked over everything with the calmness of death, patiently awaiting an order. I will seal our chakra in little Naruto, so he will see him again, someday. It is worth it, Minato said as he looked down on his wife. He is our true son. And you saw what he can do now. Kushina nodded weakly, smiling slightly. Seal, Minato demanded sharply, pointing at the Kyuubi amidst the dust clouds. The ghostly hand of the death god soared forward from his stomach, catching the fox and slowly dragging in its soul out of the great body. Minato growled as the technique tore out a part of the tailed beast for the Shinigami to devour. There was no hope of sealing the whole Kyuubi, especially not with the energy of the other Kyuubi strengthening it. The death god feasted upon that part of the Biju's energy, and Minato winced as the surge of chakra passed through him, knowing that he would soon follow it. Naruto was trying to catch his breath, and failing. He had just used a very costly jutsu, and it left him on the very edge of his consciousness. At least the pain from losing Kurama had finally subsided, and all of it was gone now, as he couldn't feel a single sliver of the great Biju inside. He was no longer a Jinchuriki. He supposed he knew what Gaara felt like, now. He was alone, leaning against the half-destroyed trunk of a huge tree, and he knew that he could not even make a single shadow clone now. Dust was everywhere, but he could hear shouting from behind the barrier. Naruto paid that distraction no heed, since he could not let any second go to waste. Kyuubi was slowly getting up, and that meant bad news. Naruto tried to stand up as well, but his legs were wobbling too much, so he ended up falling onto his face. Surprisingly, instead of getting his face full of dirt, he ended up landing on top of something soft and white. Naruto wasted some precious seconds trying to remember just when his father had lost his cloak, and why he was on top of it. A clone had to have picked it up while fighting Kurama, but after that one had popped in the last attack, it was left unattended. With a shiver, Naruto realized that he was cold, and why. The Kyuubi's chakra had washed over him like a tide. He survived only because he had learned to cope with it for years. His clothes had not been lucky, and only scraps of them remained. Naruto quickly threw the cloak over his back, and pulled on the sleeves, closing it on the front. It was that or running around half naked. The Rasengan barrage had proven a drop more deadly outside the mindscape, since he had never really used it outside his fight with the Kyuubi when first taking its chakra. His surroundings were a wasteland. Focusing once more on his fluctuating chakra levels and his tired muscles, Naruto forced himself to stand up, panting loudly at even that small action. He saw the Kyuubi lashing out at his father in the distance, but he was too far away to do anything about it, and did not have the chakra to pull it off anyway. He had maybe a single jutsu in him, if that. Naruto felt anger rising inside, washing over the pain, as he realized that this was the moment that his father died, and he was not there to help him out. Focusing whatever remains of chakra he had, he roared together with Kurama, and he knew with complete certainty where he wanted to be right then. Hiraishin no Jutsu, Minato. Someone shouted from just behind the barrier, but Naruto was gone before he even heard it. He appeared right next to Minato, just in time to push him away from the sweep of the Kyuubi's claws. The fourth twisted around, a Rasengan appearing in his hand without any preparation time, and he slammed it forward into the flesh of the creature's paw. It bit deep into Kurama's flesh and the Biju recoiled. I still need to do the Hake Fuin. Minato shouted desperately. He seemed to be in tremendous pain. I can barely move. The Kyuubi was disoriented for only a second. But Kushina stood up with a fierce expression, and she raised her arms, and chains sprang into being once again, lashing out at the vast creature, and she almost fell down from the strain. She looked 20 years older than before as she worked herself up to her knees with immense effort. Kurama's claws were suddenly tightly bound with silvery chains, fixed to the ground, and Kushina smiled in victory. Blood flowed from her mouth. Hurry, she whispered, almost choking. I can do this. Naruto jumped before Minato. His father was simply too slow now to work the difficult jutsu. For once, the yellow flash was out of power himself. Naruto slammed his right hand onto the ground, and summoned forth the ceremonial sealing pedestal. Jiraiya taught me how it works. I never thought I'd need to use it. Minato, with heavy and slow movements, leaned forward and picked up the little Naruto, placing him on top of the altar with very slow movements. You have to seal a part of me and Kushina too, when you do it. Why both of you? Naruto asked, tears running uncontrollably down his cheeks. knowing that he was watching history unfold in all its horrible glory. Why mom, too? You used the Shiki Fujin, but she should be able to survive. I'm sorry, Naruto, Kushina croaked softly. This last attack. There is nothing left, after this. Unless you seal it away, my chakra will all be gone when it breaks, and my life with it. No, you can't die again. Naruto sobbed. This is the one chance I have to let you live. Let me give you some chakra. I don't care what happens to me, you have to live. For the other Naruto. Kyuubi roared once more, shattering some of Kushina's chains, and the backlash of his rage sent Kushina sprawling to the ground again, and she was not getting up. Naruto was frozen in place in a moment of pure terror. He had most of Minato's chakra firmly grasped, prepared to place it into the seal together with the Kyuubi. But he couldn't seal his own mother away, could he? The sealing required to form a bond between someone's chakra and the seal, and when the seal was activated, it would draw in every remaining bit of his parents' chakra. They would die at his hand. Naruto, Kushina pleaded weakly. My life is over already. And don't you ever think that I would trade your life for a chance to save mine. You are my son. The Kyuubi opened its jaws, snarling something unintelligible as it jumped to kill all of them in a final devastating bite. I'm proud of you, Minato whispered, his eyes darkening. Moving as fast as lightning, tearing through his limits in the face of death, he called a final Rasengan into his hand and leapt straight towards the Kyuubi, to meet the Biju head-on in a final clash. Dad! Naruto shouted, desperately gathering his chakra for the final push needed to seal away the Kyuubi. Its jaws closed around the fourth Hokage, and there was a quiet explosion inside its mouth as the powerful Rasengan exploded inside its throat. Kurama hissed with pain, thrashing about blindly. Naruto momentarily hoped to see his father use the Hiraishin to come back to them, but there was but a sickening crunch that sent shivers down Naruto's spine, and his father's chakra was released, swirling around him like a haze, flowing with his own depleting reserves. His father was dying, or already dead. Kachiyose no jutsu, Naruto exclaimed, managing to refocus his attention to summon Gamatora for the final part of the sealing process. For a brief moment he was lost to an incredible sense of panic, realizing that he was in the past. Would the summoning contract even work? There was a loud puff of a smoke cloud as a toad appeared before him, and he let out a sigh of relief. Quick, he ordered to the confused toad, tears and sweat running down his face. Gamatora, I need you to take the key of the seal to Jiraiya. The toad obediently rolled the key scroll around himself, its eyes widening as it took in the massive form of the Kyuubi that towered over him. Minato-sama, watch out. Naruto half turned from the pedestal, and only barely realized that Kurama's claw was not heading his way, but towards the pedestal, towards his younger self, crying on the altar. Kushina tried to get in the way, raising up to a half-crouch to roll over the baby. With dread, Naruto realized that it wasn't going to be enough, and he leapt between her and the approaching claw. The toad summon disappeared moments before the Kyuubi's nail pierced through Naruto and embedded itself into Kushina's back with a sickening thud. Naruto laughed as he felt the chakra draining from around him, coughing up blood. It was over, the Hake Fuin was complete. The gigantic fox cried out in protest as its chakra began to surge into its new vessel, and most of Minato's chakra followed. A last tendril remained with Naruto, and he smiled in recognition. Kushina turned to Naruto and found his eyes. Take care of your little brother. There were many things that were left unsaid, but their eyes were locked with each other, frozen together in a moment before death. Some words were not needed. Do not blame yourself, ever, was her last whisper. Then there was a great surge of power as the massive Biju was drawn into the seal on the little boy's abdomen, crashing into the infant like a storm. The older Naruto dropped as the claw that had run him through vanished, and he only barely managed to catch the falling body of Kushina, before losing his own footing and plummeting to the rough, harsh ground. The last of the natural energy that had kept him going was dissipating. So this is what chakra exhaustion feels like, he mouthed inaudibly to himself, feeling darkness creeping over his mind. Is this how it all ends? There was a shape approaching quickly, and it came to a stop just beside him. Oji-san, Naruto whispered as he recognized Sarutobi. The nin looked quite old, even here in the past. The surprised face of the third Hokage made Naruto chuckle a little, and he coughed up blood. I'm Naruto from the future, was something he wanted to say, but all he managed was to hug Kushina closer and saying his name. Nauro, too. Your son is safe, was the last thing he heard, coupled with a child's cry. The comforting softness of his father's cloak kept him warm as his consciousness slipped away from him. He knew no more. Bandages, they were everywhere. Naruto felt like a mummy swaddled in linen, with white fabric crisscrossing over his face, his forehead, and tickling at his neck. His breaths were short as he realized his chest was restrained as well by tightly wound bandages, his hands tied up so tightly that he could not even wiggle his fingers. He let out a weak whimper of pain as his slightest movement sent a spike of agony down his spine. When he tried to get some idea of where he was, his eyes refused to open, lids heavy like never before. Forcing them with an effort of will, fighting his body all the way, only sent a wave of fresh pain along with the blinding flash of momentary sight. He did not have to be a genius to figure out that he'd gotten into serious trouble. He was probably in Konoha's hospital, Naruto mused to himself. It was not the first time he had ended up here, and probably not the last either. If he had still been outside, there would have been a lot more sounds reaching him, which meant someone had to have retrieved him from whatever foolish stunt he'd gotten into now. For once, he had apparently gotten hurt. There was only a cold, deep silence, and the painful pulse of his own heart, and neither was helping. How did I end up injured? Everything was hazy, his last nightmares still playing in his head, distorted images returning to him. There had been a battle, one that he had seen often in his worst dreams. A battle in which he saw his parents die, unable to change things, falling to the power of Kurama. As so often, the berserk beast had skewered him when he was trying to save his mother. It had to have been a dream. Delirium, feverish hallucinations. But, how had he gotten hurt? His mind wandered back to the previous day, to Konohamaru. That squirt, though not anymore, really, was growing up far too quickly for his liking. Right. He had been on his way to meet with old lady Tsunade, and he had been looking forward to it, for once. He was hoping to show off his newest technique, an S-rank that only one other person had ever known, the Hireishin. Then, pain. Had he messed up that technique? The conclusion that he had somehow managed to hurt himself in his attempt, right in front of Konohamaru or Tsunade's eyes, was a disquieting one. He shuddered at the thought, resolving that he would get out of this bed soon, and tell his one-time student and rival that everything was fine. He never needed much time to bounce back, anyway. Naruto tried opening his eyes again, cringing from the stabbing pain, hoping to move something, anything. Briefly, he worried that he might have left some things behind in his foolish attempt to brute force the Hireishin. He imagined a disturbing image of Konohamaru staring at a severed leg, still spurting a pool of blood, while the rest of him was somewhere else. His lungs labored and protested against his quick, panicked breaths, and he focused his attention away from such horror scenarios. After a few long minutes of panic, he felt that one of his toes moved, brushing against soft fabric. Good, he still had at least one leg, then, that was something. He could still become the fastest hopping shinobi, if that was all he had left. The silence was eating him up, especially the emptiness that it brought with itself, and Naruto's thoughts went inward, to the vague ache in his stomach, which was doubtlessly as bandaged as the rest of him. Yet he scarcely cared for the skin, but what lay locked beneath it. Kurama? No answer came. He called to his companion a few times more, but his voice did not reach the caged creature that had become almost like a friend, or at least, he did not answer. Naruto found only a swirling void within, his thoughts sounding muffled even to himself. He was wounded. There was a good chance that Kurama had exhausted himself by keeping him alive. His injuries felt like they were extensive, and the fact that his accelerated healing had not patched him up yet was worrying. He froze in thought as he considered his nightmare, and the strange emptiness that was pervasive, now, as if a perpetual noise had suddenly been silenced. He could barely feel more than hints of Kurama's chakra in his veins. They had never felt this clear, this unpolluted, with only his own chakra flowing freely. It was as if the fox was gone. Instead, when he reached that place deep within where the seal was supposed to be, there was a swirling touch of something else. Something that felt like trust, and pride, and consolation. He recognized that feeling, even if he knew it was impossible. Father? No answer came to him, and he sighed. He felt only a trace, a distant, wayward spark of chakra, a remnant of intent and action. Perhaps a last breath, living on inside of him. It was as if that part of his father which had once appeared to him to close his seal, that fragment of the fourth Hokage, had returned to the seal. Yet, that chakra had been exhausted, vanishing into nothingness. How could it be back? Unless, he remembered his nightmare, those last moments of horror and the raging Kyuubi. Kurama, torn from the seal by force, devoured by the far greater creature that towered above all, free from a Jinchuriki. He remembered himself, standing up to it, using his last strength to seal it away, to force it into a new host. But that could not have happened. It was a dream, wasn't it? Naruto tried to cry out, but all that emerged was a weak gurgle that turned into a coughing fit. Had it really happened? Had he sealed away Kurama, as well as what remained of his parents? Had they died again? He focused on the seal, and he called out for something, anything, from that bit of his father. Some sign that he was alive, that he had cheated death. That Naruto had not failed to save his parents in the one chance he had to do so. His body convulsed uncontrollably as a torrent of emotion tore through him, and he twitched as his eyes tore open in twilight. He wrestled through the pain, glad that he could see the ceiling now, that he could get some sense of reality. Even the dim light that suffused the room burned in his eyes, but he ignored the painful sensation, taking in his surroundings. He coughed, spitting out a mixture of blood and slime, but his moment of disgust was interrupted. A tall figure appeared in the room, its chakra tightly controlled. The shape moved into view, though it looked more like a shadow than a real person, and it had its head to the side rather like a bird would. Instead of a normal face, there was only a strange mask. For an irrational moment, Naruto imagined it was Tobi, gloating, and he hissed in fear, or hate, he could not tell. It took him a good few seconds to realize that he was instead looking at one of Konoha's Anbu, a specialist shinobi. His mask looked like a rat? Naruto could not remember if he ever saw the rat mask in use. Before he could manage to croak out anything, the Anbu spoke instead. "Try not to move, sir. Your injuries are severe," Rat said in a quiet whisper, though even that sound seemed to echo in Naruto's head, clashing painfully with the silence. He gave a very small bow. "I will inform Sarutobi-sama that you have awoken. Please, rest." However much Naruto tried to hold on to the image of the rat-masked nin, his exhaustion prevented it, and his body betrayed him when his heavy eyelids closed again, and the room slipped away. Hanging on to the very edge of consciousness, Naruto could just barely feel someone working medical jutsu on him, the warmth of foreign chakra easing his pain and lulling him into deeper sleep. He imagined that Sakura had reached him, and the vaguest of smiles flickered across his face before pain and darkness robbed it away. It might have been hours or even days until he came to once more, though he suspected it was on the shorter end, as he could feel that the bandages on his face had not been changed, still soaked with sweat and blood. There was no other way to tell time, not with the constant waves of oblivion and emptiness crashing over him. There were no windows in the room either, which was dimly lit at present, probably to spare his eyes. The pain was not as bad as before, and his eyes roved through the room again, pausing on little shelves with scrolls, small bottles filled with pills, and a single three-pronged kunai. Somewhere nearby, a child was crying. That was what had woken him up, and he turned very slowly towards the sound. "You're awake once more." It was a careful statement from the nearby darkness, spoken with some hesitance. Spoken by an old, familiar voice from the distant past. Naruto felt tears work their way into the corners of his eyes as he realized what that might mean. "I was beginning to fear that the fever would keep you. How do you feel?" the third Hokage asked kindly. Naruto tried, croaking. Water," he wheezed out to the darkened room. His throat felt like the desert of Suna, dry and unforgiving. He clenched his teeth at the thought that the first thing he said to the old man, back from the dead, was something as banal as such a request. When water touched his parched lips, Naruto tried to raise his hand to the small bowl out of pure instinct, and pain shot through his arm. Though he forced his way past it, he had felt far worse in the past. It was like trying to tear off 1,000 chains to move, yet he managed to move his hand. Slowly, carefully, he met the offered bowl midway and helped it to his lips, raising the head as much as he could. Perhaps it was a banal request, but right now, he did not care. The small stream water washed over his lips like ambrosia, the ever-sweet wine of the gods. It was like a dream come true, a fresh taste of life, and it just wasn't enough. Too good to be true, too pure to be drunk with reservation. Naruto tilted the small bowl even more. He had barely realized just what state his throat was in, had he been screaming. And though the cold water hurt, it felt good, cleansing. The water flowed onto his face, down his chin, onto the pillow. His bandages got wet and soaked, freeing the scent of dried blood. It made him shiver with relief, and he hoped that the cool touch would never end. It still wasn't enough to douse the flames that seemed to sear his throat, but much of the roughness faded. More? He asked, trying to focus his gaze, his eyes wandering to meet the third's. The thought returned in full force. Could it really be that he was speaking to the man whose funeral he had attended? His grandfather in everything but name moved back from the bed, and Naruto lost him in the gloom. He faded into the darkness as well as any Nara could. There was still a child crying, somewhere in the room. Why was a child unattended? He tried to twist his head to pierce the darkness of the room, but the movement hurt, sending a shiver down his skin. Yet, with patience and deliberation, he could move. That was a good sign. All his parts seemed to be where they were supposed to be, if completely covered in bloodied bandages. Suddenly the small light of a candle flickered to life in the room, casting thousands of shadows everywhere. It was the only light in the midst of the darkness. There was no child in the direction of the high-pitched cries. He had been tricked by the strange echoes of the small, enclosed room, and he wondered how intentional that misdirection really was. He could see that level of paranoia among some of the medical nin. The third Hokage stared down at him. His silhouette was without his usual triangular hat, and Naruto felt slightly puzzled by that, but the somewhat short if imposing image was unmistakable. Maybe, he dismissed the thought, it wouldn't do him good to guess without anything to stand on. Empty guesses were pointless, Kakashi had told him once. Of course, that might have been about the plot of the next Icha issue, but the principle was sound. What do I know? Someone that had to be the third Hokage was currently pouring a new bowl of water for him, looking quite comfortable in the darkness, tending to his little candle that flickered merrily. It didn't feel like anyone else was in the room, beside the little child, and that was strange. Where were the Anbu, ever-present guardians? Outside the door, maybe? The child was still crying, and Naruto had to turn completely to see him, secluded in the far corner of the room. Wet hair and fabric stuck to the back of his neck as he raised himself a little, an uncomfortable feeling. There it was, then. A small crib, in which a tiny child was fidgeting, crying about something that might have been pain, hunger, or a recent nightmare. Who could tell with children? A chilling realization traveled down Naruto's spine as he saw the delicate tuft of bright blonde hair above pudgy cheeks, each of which was marked with 3 small lines, like scars. Whiskers, almost. The ghostly shadows of the candle played over those familiar features, and he could not help but be amazed. It was him, he realized. The child was him, a little Naruto. The nightmare was real. He let out a pitiful sob as his mind raced back to his arrival, to that moment he had stood beside his father, his living father, and helped him complete the ritual that robbed his life away. Little Naruto had been there, his younger self, and here he was now. A fresh Jinchuriki, created by his own hand. It did not make sense that the boy was here. There was a separate wing for little children in Konoha's hospital, and Naruto was certain the third would have placed the taik in the safest part of it, knowing what he carried within him. Yet, here he was in one of the enclosed wings of the hospital, with him. This place was, judging from the lack of windows, reserved for injured guests or prisoners. With shinobi it was usually a mixture of the two, he supposed. It was certainly not meant for children, though. Please, help yourself. Sarutobi offered another small bowl of water. The old man's eyes flashed to the child, and then back to him, and Naruto could practically sense the gears turning. The third was not trying to show it, but he was clearly paying a great deal of attention to the little crying child, even as his eyes peered seemingly through Naruto. His gaze was not hostile, intrigued maybe, or contemplative, scheming. He could believe all of those. Naruto pointed weakly at the baby, at himself. Could you help? Sarutobi offered his cup with water again. Naruto frowned slightly as he ignored the gesture, however parched his throat still felt. This was uncharacteristic of the old man, and he tried to sit up to give himself some air, so he could actually speak. It did not help much. Give. Here, he whispered, indicating the water. The words were slow, and his tongue felt like it had not been used in ages. This was probably the longest time he had ever stayed in a hospital, and that was only judging only from the way how raspy his voice was. If Kurama had still been there, he would have long since recovered, he was certain. But he was not. For the first time in his life, he was only human. Go help. The task of sitting up proved nearly impossible, since the worst pain was in his chest, where Kurama's vicious claw had pierced him. He suddenly found himself breathing so shortly he was unable to find any strength in himself, and he simply sagged in place. Just as he thought of that wounded rebelled, as if reacting to him, and icy pain tore through his side. The third took pity and Naruto felt fit hands helping him up, ushering him into a more comfortable position. It was only then that he realized that though the third was old, it seemed like he had always been that. He was more than 10 years younger than the man he remembered best. In the candlelight it was impossible to understand just what was going in Sarutobi's head as he stood there with a perfectly expressionless face. His eyes were the darkest shadows, the little lights twinkled within, betraying the darkness. His candle seemed to shine brighter than the sun. Naruto's eyes just would not adjust, and he sighed. He managed to move a trembling hand enough to take the water and drink. A few more gulps. What about little Naruto? Was his first full question, as he listened to the cries of his younger counterpart. Why are you taking care of me, when he is crying? Sarutobi nodded faintly, and moved towards the crib with measured steps. Naruto caught the calming sing-song whispers the third used to soothe the child. It felt eerie familiar. He could almost imagine himself as a little boy, listening to a song like this, sitting in the old man's lap as he did his paperwork with a small smile. That might have even happened, he mused, yet he had probably been too little to truly remember. The method of soothing worked, too. Little Naruto quieted down and started to listen to the third, moving easily with the rhythm, calming down by the second. Slowly the boy's eyes slid closed. Naruto struggled with his water, forcing his other hand up to join in an attempt to get a little more leverage, though it was nearly hopeless. It was like holding a heavy weight, or performing an incredible feat of strength, since his muscles felt like rubber. And this was just a tiny bowl of water. He could not even imagine walking right now. He was utterly harmless. He drank once more, slower, more carefully than before, patient. This time, he didn't spill a single drop. This time, it would have been a waste. It took him some time to empty it, but at least now he did not feel like his throat would give out any second. It still ached, but Naruto could live with an ache, if he had to. Trying to put the bowl on the nearby cabinet proved too hard on his muscles, and it slipped and fell on the floor with a soft clatter. Catching the small wooden thing would have proved too painful, he was sure, so he didn't even bother trying. The old man, having calmed the little boy with the lullaby, turned back around, and picked up the bowl, meeting Naruto's eyes. The gaze lingered, assessing Naruto's physical state. He was doing exactly same as Naruto, watching and waiting. Naruto tried to be as patient as possible, frantically thinking. The village probably believed he was a spy, at least the Hokage would. That explained his presence in the secure wing, and the careful nature of the third's movements. What else would someone think about a complete stranger, appearing in the middle of a disaster like the attack of the Kyuubi? It hit him, then, what he had done. The three-pronged kunai on the far end of the room was still there. He could see the light of the candle flickering on its razor-sharp edges. The Hiraishin. He had used his father's technique, but it had done something it shouldn't have. Something that seemed impossible. Instead of traveling to the kunai that was so very nearby, in viewing distance, something had pulled him off course, had tossed him on a bumpy and painful ride, through space and time to the start of everything. And he had ended up here. Here, at the Kyuubi attack, at the last moments of his father's life, the only other person who had mastered it. He was in the past, and a theory had begun to form on why. There was an aspect of time manipulation in the seal of the Hiraishin, supposedly for mere milliseconds, just barely enough to make the technique work. Not days or weeks, and certainly not years. Yet, he had done just that. Broken through the limits. Kurama. That was the only explanation. The tailed beast's chakra had been surging in his veins, mixing with his own as he let it run wild, his concentration on the new technique. The chakra was harmless to him, as he had long since gotten used to it, but he had not considered what it could do to a jutsu like this. His father had not been a Jinchuriki, he had only ever used his own chakra for this technique. Yet, Naruto had poured in his own considerably supply, and in his failure to reach his intended destination, had used that which was he could grasp to extend the time available to him. The incredibly potent, impossibly unpredictable power of the Nine Tails. He was lucky he had not appeared above the dinner table of the first Hokage and Uchiha Madara, all things considered. Yet, Kurama was gone. Drained from Naruto's use of the Hiraishin technique, the creature of living chakra had suddenly entered a reality in which he already existed. And unlike physical beings, the tailed beast had no defense against the paradox of existing more than once. He had no clever time-travel trickery to get around that issue. Thus the stronger one, the Kyuubi that attacked Konoha, had gobbled him up, absorbed the future Kurama straight through the seal. Naruto grimaced as his wandering thoughts focused back on the third, leaving the predicament aside for a moment in favor of more immediate issues. A younger third, freshly robbed of his successor, would certainly soon retake his seat. He was the so-called god of shinobi, and probably the strongest shinobi since the first, according to most. What would this man with the information he could give? What would a Kage, fresh out of a war and the most devastating attack on the village in living memory, do with the key to the future? How do I explain who I am? Naruto considered the question for a moment, wondering if he could go by his experiences at all. He had never really known the third as a Kage, only as a grandfatherly figure. The first time in his memory that the man had gone all out had been when he died. Telling the truth was his best bet, he supposed, but he had no idea how the old man would react. Could he even lie to the third's face if he wanted to? Naruto took a deep breath, feeling the emptiness in his stomach make way for an uneasy queasiness. Here goes nothing. He opened his mouth, pausing in indecision, taking only a shuddering breath. He thought frantically of something unimportant to ask, so he could win himself a couple of seconds, either that, or blurt out everything he knew at once, to get it over with. Sarutobi, noticing his hesitation, spoke first. The seal was applied successfully, as you might wish to know, Sarutobi began, glancing at the child by his side with a caring expression that sent a shiver down Naruto's back. The littler Naruto was contentedly sleeping in his crib, unaware of the tense standoff. To summon the Shinigami and lock the weakened creature's chakra away, an admirable and self-sacrificial plan. I can see clearly that the seal is based on Kushina's, but it is far more complex. What is its purpose? Naruto frowned, and he narrowed his eyes. Another test? He muttered under his breath, meeting the third's eyes. He fidgeted slightly in place when the old man met his gaze with an intensity that stole his breath away. He could not move away, not in the state he was in, but there was no mistaking the awesome power that the third was deliberately showing him, at least in part. In the light of the flickering candle, the third smiled, his eyes gleaming with interest. That seal is not meant to keep the Kyuubi locked away forever. Naruto sighed, and the lack of surprise in the third's eyes convinced him that the man had already known. He could see the tenseness in the old man's frame, though, and he knew that he had better answer, or face the god of shinobi, while completely incapable of even getting up. The Biju are not inherently evil, they are more of a force of nature. A volcano that erupts in the middle of a village doesn't want to destroy it from some kind of misunderstood anger. Yet, all we humans have ever done for the Biju is to seal them in living people, to try and silence them, so it is natural to expect resistance. Their power, though, it will be needed. The third let out a surprised murmur, but did not offer any protest. The Hake no Fuin Shiki is not a prison. It is a gate. A locked gate, but one that could be opened with the right key. When the Kyuubi understands what it means to exist inside a Jinchuriki, and I know that that will happen since the seal doesn't prohibit him from watching what is going on outside, it's going to become something more than a beast. If I am somehow wrong, though. Naruto shifted a bit in his bed, pain in his chest intensifying, but he ignored it. The seal is designed to allow drops of chakra to leak through, slowly robbing the fox of its power, so that it will not be easily released. It would take years of coexistence for that to bear fruit, though. Coexistence. Naruto shivered as he thought of that panicked moment when the nine tails had been torn away. He hoped that a remnant of his Kurama continued on, in the little child. It would not be right, otherwise. It is an almost impossible responsibility to bear, being a Jinchuriki, Naruto whispered, realizing that one constant in all his years as a shinobi was now gone, ripped away forcefully, eaten. Kurama, in the end, had been a part of him. If not a friend, then a true companion, a Biju that just happened to share his body and life. And now, there was nothing, for him, at least. In the end, it might be for the better. For whom? Sarutobi retained his impassive stance, yet inside, Naruto could tell he was quickly making connections and dismissing theories one after another, disturbingly quick as all geniuses were. For Naruto, or for Konoha? He asked. How can you even ask that? Naruto spluttered then, somewhat confused as to the shift in topic. Konoha always came first for me. The third glowered, and his eyes pinned Naruto down. Is that why you let Kushina use her clan technique, knowing it would kill her? Is that why you didn't use the Shiki Fusion yourself? So that you could live, for Konoha? What? Naruto felt anger rising inside of him, though it seemed lacking. There was only a remnant of the rage he was capable of when fighting together with Kurama. Still, he was furious, and he clenched his fists, even as jolts of agony traveled through his heavily bandaged fingers. At least one wound tore open and started bleeding again, the warm blood waking him up from his stupor. He hissed the next words louder than before, the memories of that terrible fight at the forefront of his mind. I never wanted them to die, old man. Mom should have lived, but she was so headstrong, and Dad. I should have been the one to use that technique, not him. Then I could have had a father, like it should have been to begin with. I never wished for anything like this. I lost everything, again. The little child twitched in his sleep, the loud exclamations stirring him nearly to wakefulness. Naruto glanced to him, a chill running down his spine as he realized what it meant that little Naruto was there. It was a sheer miracle, but the child didn't wake up, and Naruto turned back to the Sarutobi, not calmer by any stretch of the word, but perhaps a little more centered. For a short moment, the third Hokage smiled in the shadows, like he had just won a difficult shogi match against a Nara, though the expression vanished so quickly that Naruto wondered if he had really seen it. What is your game, Oji-san? Naruto asked at last, with some measure of calm, still fuming on the inside as he felt blood trickling down his hand and onto the white sheets of his bed. I don't understand what you're getting at. Why is the first thing you ask about that damn seal? The third raised an eyebrow. Tell me, when you sealed away the Kyuubi, you were already wounded, correct? He ignored Naruto's anger, though was visibly intrigued by his way of address. I saw the demon chakra flowing through you, coursing through your wounds. It did the same to many in the village, and all but a precious few died from it, rotting away from its corrupting influence, its poison. That only happens if you don't know how to negate its effects, Naruto grunted more than said. I do know, obviously. Don't insult my intelligence, even if I'm not a genius. You clearly know enough to dare put me in the same room with the kid. He glanced over. You've probably got me covered with more chakra suppression seals than I can count, so just spit it out. I can't stop you. How do you know the seal will hold? The third asked, ignoring the demand. Of course I know it will work, because I've seen it do so. Naruto tried to cross his arms, staining the sheets even more, but he had to give up halfway. His arms just refused to move properly. He settled for a glare. Look, you're clearly trying to lure me into some sort of verbal trap, and I get enough of that from Shikamaru. Skip the middle part and get to the end. For a moment, he thought he saw Sarutobi smile again, though his eyes remained hard. The attack has affected many, and the Kyuubi's chakra is corrosive not only to the body, but to the mind. When we found you, you were covered in blood, and the vile chakra aided you, even as your body expelled it. Most of those who did not die from exposure to that chakra are in the hospital too, the mental ward. Naruto felt like he would be sick. They went mad? Delusional, murderous and indiscriminate about their targets. Most are civilians, they do not pose much of a threat. You can imagine that it is a different story with shinobi. The third sighed. I am afraid that it will be some weeks before your body recovers from what happened. You will retain scars, I believe, even with the best treatments by the very best people we have. He paused for a long while. Before we move on, we must settle something. You are not Minato, are you? Naruto blinked in confusion. Of course not, what are you? He shook his head slightly. I get it. You think I'm nuts too, don't you? But why would you? He looked at his bandaged form in dismay, realizing that between his shaggy blonde hair and his blue eyes, he did look a lot like his father. They were even about the same age, too, crazy as that was. He'd been wearing the cloak, too, and holding a three-pronged kunai. Ah, Yeah, I can see why you would. But you can do tests or something to check, right? Naruto tried to glimpse what Sarutobi was thinking as the man looked on impassively. He had spent enough time with the old Hokage to have some idea of what he was like, but he could not be sure. Yet, the thought that the old man would honestly confuse him with his father, it didn't seem likely. If he did, though, he would need to stifle that in the bud, right now. Naruto narrowed his eyes and grimaced. You've got it all backwards. Minato, my dad, is dead. I saw him die myself. I felt the last of his chakra leaving him when he used his final moments to tear out the Kyuubi's chakra, sealing some part of it in the death god. I'm not him, and I'm not sure how you can mistake us, we're kind of different. I suppose I look too much like a mummy to tell physically, but that shouldn't matter. He paused and glanced again at the little child, who was content with sleeping in, unaware of how much crazy stuff was waiting for him later in life. My name is Uzumaki Naruto. I'm not Minato, I'm his son. He winced as he dragged himself forcefully further upright, aware that something tore on his back, stitches ripping the skin apart under the stress. I used the Hiraishin. I was the second person ever, as far as I know, and as you probably know, that's a time and space jutsu. I overloaded it with Kyuubi's chakra by accident. The place that I came out, where I was finally able to get a grip, was here and now. I am the boy in that crib. I am from the future. Sarutobi nodded, and this time he definitely smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile, as it reminded Naruto more of a vicious predator, rather than his Oji-san. The old man crossed his arms. Very well. Prove it. Only a few hours earlier, a student met his teacher behind closed doors in the Hokage's tower, part of which had been flattened in the Kyuubi's attack. A handful of trusted Anbu were standing guard outside the building, even as fires raged in isolated parts of it, and they did not allow anyone within hearing distance, just in case anyone tried anything funny while the village was hurting. Matters of Konoha's future were under discussion, and there was no such thing as too much security. Jiraiya of the Sannin stood by the crumbling remains of the western wing, and shook his head in dismay. He had been out of the village when the attack occurred, as he was chasing down interesting tidbits in neighboring countries. It was not until a day or two later, when word of mouth crossed the borders, that he realized what had happened, and he had hurried home as quickly as he could. He had cursed his decision not to summon any of his toads while undercover, realizing that he would have known far sooner. It was too late now. Iwa was as wary of Konoha as ever, and when they first spoke of the possibility that their old enemy, one that so roundly defeated them in the Third Shinobi World War, had been weakened or even destroyed, Jiraiya had put it down to the usual exaggerations that happened with rumors like that. Claims that the village was a smoking crater or burning like a candle were obviously overblown, but a pattern quickly emerged. Disaster. The Yellow Flash was dead, some claimed. Others spoke of his injuries, of being carried from the battlefield with only a bloodied cloak wrapped around him, bleeding his life out. The rumors were spread with a certain amount of glee among the people of Iwa, considering the massacres that Minato had been responsible for among their forces in the war. But Jiraiya had forced himself to ignore it, and to make his way to the border with as much speed as he could without being spotted as a spy. The toads had filled him in by the time he reached Konoha's walls. Gamatora had shown him the key to a seal, though he was less than coherent about the circumstances in which he had received it, and a worrying possibility occurred to Jiraiya. The key was certainly for a very complicated seal, strong enough to lock something powerful away, something huge. Like a tailed beast. Like the Kyuubi. The total silence from Konoha, either from his old sensei or his student, only made things seem more dire. Setting aside his own worries for the moment, he thought of repercussions to the international relations that he had been sent to monitor. The rumor of Minato's death alone would send a strong message to all of Konoha's enemies, declaring weakness. Although he had been a cage for only a relatively short time, Minato's reputation was legendary, and Iwa in particular was terrified of facing him on the battlefield, refusing even to come too close to the border. With him dead or wounded, they might decide that now's the time to take what they wanted. On top of that, there was Kyuubi no Yuko to consider. A tailed beast did not just vanish, and Jiraiya had a sinking feeling that he knew what had happened to it. Released from Kushina's seal, surely killing her, the only way to get rid of it would be to place it somewhere new, and he suspected that's what the key was for. It was for the seal of a new Jinchuriki. Sarutobi seemed quite surprised when Jiraiya appeared before him in the ruins of his ruined tower, exhausted and sleepy, though with boundless determination clear on his face. Without any delay, the two nin had adjourned to Minato's office, which had survived the worst of the Kyuubi's assault. "I came as quickly as I could," Jiraiya said. "The 9 tails. I can scarcely believe it." He shook his head. How did it escape from the seal? I checked it only a month or 2 ago. Kushina was in good shape." The third sighed. "A good question. I do not know the answer," he replied, folding his hands together as he sat down at the desk, in the chair that had been his for decades, though it had recently become Minato's domain. "We can assume that whoever released the creature knew where it was kept, and when the seal would be at its very weakest." Childbirth. Sarutobi nodded slowly. Kushina was in a safe and secluded place, well outside the village, just in case something should go wrong. Minato was there. Although it is uncertain what exactly happened then, we know that the creature was brought here, perhaps summoned from afar, after it was torn away from its host. Kushina survived, for a time, Uzumaki longevity, I'm sure, but it took her life to get it placed into a new vessel before it could destroy everything. She is dead, then. Jiraiya sighed. It took her life, Shiki Fujin? He asked, although he was sure he knew the answer. And Minato was the one to seal it away? The third nodded slightly, though it was a hesitant gesture. He sighed. I don't know. Jiraiya narrowed his eyes. Alright. What's that about? What's going on? Naruto became the new Jinchuriki, that is a fact, Sarutobi answered at last. Their son, newly born, was tasked with the same tradition that has passed down the Uzumaki lineage since Konoha's beginnings. I suppose it is fitting, though it is a heavy burden to bear. He frowned. There is something strange about all this, Jiraiya. Not only the seal, which is far more complex than I expected, but a certain person. There was a silence for a little time as Sarutobi gazed out of his window, cracked and wobbly, before he turned and shook his head. I know I should focus on other things, but I cannot let matters go. The village is weakened, both in defensive strength and in morale, by the destruction that was brought upon it. Your presence will help a little, and I have sent a messenger to find Tsunade as well. We will need all that we can muster to weather this storm. It looks even worse than I imagined, Jiraiya commented when he finally sat down across from Sarutobi. The fox did quite a number on the village, hundreds are dead. And it was true. Konoha was devastated, soot still clogging the air, even a full week after the Kyuubi attack. Wildfires burned throughout the depths of the forest, and buildings slowly crumbled to the ground, torn from their foundations. The surrounding woods had new clearings that had been torn up by huge claws, the very landscape redesigned with an application of fathomless violence. The outer wall was still there, at least in part, but large breaches needed to be filled, and the Uchiha police forces were working overtime just to introduce a small measure of control into the chaos. It did not help that many of their number had died in the fight to drive the creature from the village. The physical damage was insubstantial compared to the amount of death that was in the air, the clear sense of hopelessness that had caught everyone in the wake of the tragedy, when the scale of mayhem became clear. In one vicious slash of fate, Konoha had lost most of its powerful shinobi, and many more were still struggling with their life in the hospital, perhaps never to fight again. Madness was all too common, inspired by the Kyuubi's noxious chakra or not, and more than one shinobi had been put down by sheer necessity as they tore into innocent villagers, imagining them to be terrible demons. It will take years for Konoha to return to its former state, Sarutobi said softly, looking weary and old. I'm sure that surrounding nations are already watching this with anticipation, preparing to step in if our weakness becomes too overt to ignore. Unfortunately, that's true. Jiraiya nodded tiredly. Onoki the fence-sitter would have acted already if he wasn't afraid that the case cage might strike him in the back if he tried anything. Talk in the streets of Iwagakure is that the case cage believes Onoki might die soon and wants to use the most of the opportunity. Jiraiya took a short drink of sake, savoring the taste as he wondered how long it would be before he could truly enjoy it again. Right now he would rather drown himself in the stuff. Onoki is furious, but that probably means he's too busy to actually invade us. He went as far as to claim that he's not going to appoint a successor anytime soon, which suggests that we're an afterthought. He could change his mind, however. That talk you mentioned, the third said contemplatively, his eyes gleaming for a short moment. Was it, by any chance, started at one of Iwa's bathhouses? They do have good baths. Jiraiya allowed himself a short, wavering smile. Iwa's uncertainty should give us space for maneuvering. Though, we should not delay too much. The Tsuchikage might come here personally, if he thinks that he has anything to gain by it, and if he sees this downtrodden village, he certainly would not hesitate to barge in. The third nodded slowly, and Jiraiya shook his head. Alright, enough about the damn politics, I put this off long enough. Lay it on me, then. Kushina is dead, Naruto is born and cursed to be a Jinchuriki. What became of Minato? Sarutobi sighed. Jiraiya winced. Dead, then? Maybe. Sarutobi fingered his pipe slowly. When the Kyuubi was free and rending apart the village, Minato and Kushina locked themselves away with it, behind protective barriers, far outside the walls where its fury could not tear up the villagers any further. Their chains and space-time barrier blocked me. I had no chance to break through quickly enough to help. When the creature was sealed away, all those techniques were destroyed, the barriers came down, and I made my way in. There, I found someone. Jiraiya frowned uncertainly. Someone? The third nodded wearily. Little Naruto survived, and one other person. Initially I took him to be Minato. He was bleeding out, and the Kyuubi's chakra had seared him all across his body, so there was little I could do but make sure that not all was lost, that the child would have a father. I took him back here, convinced that he was my successor, but something was off. It became clear to me when I helped with cleaning his wounds, since even now there are precious few medical nin available, with so many working to save those who were hurt in the attack. Jiraiya blinked. If he's not Minato, then who is this person? I don't know, the third admitted, and he shrugged helplessly. He has Minato's blonde hair, his eyes, and he was wearing his cloak. I feared that he might be Minato, tainted by the Kyuubi, doomed to insanity like so many others. But when I reached him, he was awake for a few moments, only calling for Naruto. He poured himself a drink as he shivered. Yet, there were too many little things that do not fit. I don't think he's Minato, after all. Which begs the question, who is he? An intruder? Perhaps the one who released the tailed beast in the first place? But that does not fit, since he seems to have completed the ritual that made little Naruto a Jinchuriki, greatly endangering himself in the process. What traitor would unleash the creature, only to reseal it into a newborn that he would know would be heavily guarded? Much less with the last of his chakra? Jiraiya paced through the room. You have not been able to ask questions yet, I take it. These sounds like the half-formed hypotheses of someone who has not been getting enough sleep. He sent a warning look to his old sensei. Has this person woken up yet? No, Sarutobi answered softly. If that didn't present us enough of a puzzle, it seems he might not even live to talk about what he did. His condition has been critical for the entire week, and is slow in improving. If he meant to do something terrible, he had a strange way of going about it. Jiraiya hummed under his breath, concerned. Why do you believe he is someone else, then? Physical changes? The third nodded. He seems different. I'm sure you would be able to notice it too. There's something that doesn't quite fit. Maybe in the shape of his jaw and the slightly different slant of his eyes, or the proportions. The same type of differences that you would use to distinguish a poor hench from the real person. I used an older photo for comparison, not trusting my memory, and there are more of these little details, too many not to be noticed under scrutiny. And the whiskers, they completely baffle me. They look much the same that Naruto has, in fact. Without seeing him myself, I cannot be certain. Jiraiya shrugged. He used the Hake no Fuin Shiki, I gather. It might be the cause of that last feature, although I would not stake my life on it. It seems somewhat plausible, though. How so? Sarutobi downed his sake in a quick gulp, without taking pleasure in it. He merely desired to deaden his nerves for a while, lest he collapse from his schedule, which barely contained any sleeping hours at all. He would not admit to it, but Jiraiya was perceptive as always. Biju chakra works in seemingly chaotic patterns. Jiraiya started his explanation, frowning darkly. Minato and I spent some time discussing that particular theoretical aspect a couple of years ago, as an intellectual challenge. It is not unheard of for a Jinchuriki to obtain some physical features reminiscent of the Biju, if exposed to the channeled chakra. There are several examples of it throughout history. An accident, then? Jiraiya did not respond immediately, rubbing his chin. Not necessarily. The theory would allow for a deliberate attempt, though I would not know why anyone should desire these features. With the way this seal works, as far as I can tell, it forces the Kyuubi's chakra down both bodies, the one using the seal serving as a conduit for the energy pouring into the Jinchuriki. It should not have been enough to induce physical changes, since the human body gives away under the strain long before then. Yet, Minato could have found a way for outlasting that terrible chakra. He was always a genius when it came to chakra manipulation. I would not put it past him that he figured out a way to protect itself from the corrupting influence. There is something else, a strange chakra signature. Sarutobi took out a small piece of paper from his pocket and slid it across the table. I had it examined by one of the medical nin that I swore to silence, but he could make neither heads nor tails of the results of the analysis. I could only make educated guesses. Maybe you could shed some light? Jiraiya glanced over the contents of the paper quickly, tracing the sketched graphs with narrowed eyes as his mind jumped to huge lists of obscure numbers that he had learned like the back of his hand, decades ago. Two of the lines were very familiar. A trace of Biju chakra, which was to be expected. There's some that partially matches the pattern of Naruto as it was when I last checked, though it's always difficult to measure in the unborn, so that's debatable. In any case, since Naruto is a Jinchuriki now, all bets are off. There's also a strange mixture of Minato's own chakra, and Kushina's. The Sannin blinked. I had no idea that could happen. Remarkable. I hypothesized that this person might have received it when she died via the Shiki fusion. The chakra might have latched onto something familiar, the third supplied, when Jiraiya didn't continue. Kushina's body is only a shell now, not even a trace of leftover chakra. Maybe, Jiraiya allowed. I can't claim to understand the whole thing, but I have the key to the seal from Minato. It's really complicated fuinjutsu work. I'm going to need to take a look at his kid to be sure, and it might take me more than a couple of days to decipher it fully, but the main difference is in the way of sealing. The key suggests that it is on an entirely different level than the usual Uzumaki seals. Minato improved it, retaining only the base of Kushina's sealing techniques. Judging by what I've seen, this seal should even allow the Biju some awareness, and possibly release chakra into its host. The third shivered. For what purpose? Jiraiya smiled thinly. Minato always did surprise me with new ideas. Maybe there's something more to it that we can't even begin to guess. But I'm sure it will be a solid piece of work. If something happens, I have the key, so I'll be able to tighten or loosen it up a bit. Minato would never just endanger the village. If it was Minato that made the seal, Sarutobi said, looking worriedly at Jiraiya. If I am right, and we have an imposter in Minato's place, what then? I witnessed the final part of the sealing, after Kushina's shield fell, and there was no chance a switch could have happened at that time. The person I retrieved is the one who sealed away the fox. If he is someone else, what would that mean? What dangers could be hidden in the seal, placed as it was by a stranger? Jiraiya frowned, weighing the possibility seriously. Whoever this person is, Minato or not, he must have used a toad summon to bring the key to me, and that must have been one of the last parts of the sealing process. Did you notice Gamatora at all? I did see a summon retreating, Sarutobi agreed. I think it was a toad, but we cannot take that for a fact. It is supposed to be impossible to trick a summoning contract, Jiraiya said. I could ask Bunta, but I doubt that any of his folk would show up to a stranger, and I've got the summoning contract. He paused for a long time. Assuming that we are dealing with an imposter. A very good one, you will assign secret observation, I imagine? No, Sarutobi smirked at his student. Minato was always too good not to notice Anbu following him, and any pretender would know that. No, I would ask you to take up a position as his tag-along, at least for now. The real Minato would appreciate the support, I'm sure, and you are certainly someone who could deduce if my disturbing suspicions are correct. Why do I feel that it is not going to be as easy as it sounds? Jiraiya frowned. Are you going to be taking the hat, until we are completely sure it's Minato? There was a loud knock on the door. Come on in, Sarutobi called. A brief warning glance sent Jiraiya's way. Did something happen? Sarutobi-sama, Jiraiya-sama. The Anbu with a rat mask bowed slightly. I come from the hospital. Hokage-sama woke up. Prove it. Naruto nervously scratched his head as he stared at the third Hokage. It hurt a bit since even with all the bandages in the way, his delicate skin could not take much abuse yet. Kurama's remarkable healing had vanished right alongside his chakra, it seemed. He did not care much for the aches and pains, though, as it was not really his body that was under strain. In truth, Naruto was engaging in the most difficult mental exercises he had yet attempted since his jaunt into the past. He was trying to remember something useful. How do I prove I'm from the future? His mind raced as he tried to reason out what he could use, and he felt the skeptical gaze of the third boring into him. But it turned out to be a lot more complicated than he assumed. Maybe I could use something about the Uchiha clan. No. He shook his head with a sigh. Right. All the Uchiha would be alive, he muttered under his breath. Most of what he remembered from the past had happened after the Kyuubi attack, years from this particular present, and even if he knew things about the attack, everyone would know them in this time. It was so damn frustrating, he groaned, fidgeting rather uncomfortably in the hospital bed. The conversation had already drained him, and the few bleeding wounds that had torn in process were getting annoying, sapping his strength. He glanced up, biting his lip in annoyance. Do you have any idea how difficult this is? I've never. Wait, maybe Orochimaru. When did he leave Konoha again? Before the attack or after? Was there something about hidden labs? Bah, take your time, Sarutobi interjected, shattering Naruto's thought process as his attention was diverted. The voice in which it was said, though mild in tone, implied anything but limitless time. The third was getting impatient. Naruto grumbled in agitation. Right, I know some things about my father. He smiled briefly, then his expression wavered again. They probably know more about him than I do. But everyone knows about him. No, wait, I got it this time. Honest. There was a pause, and the third just stared with that impenetrable gaze. Cold, almost, quite unlike what Naruto was used to from that man. I suppose the knowledge about my mom, about Uzumaki Kushina being the Kyuubi's Jinchuriki doesn't count, does it? Naruto grimaced. Considering little me is in the same room, I guess it wouldn't. He slammed his palm onto his face, the pain from a sudden movement sizzling through his muscles, sending a chill down his back. Come on, Oji-san, how the heck could I have known that history would come in handy someday? It's so boring. Sarutobi raised an eyebrow. Honestly, if there was one class one didn't care for at all in the academy. Naruto rolled his eyes. Well, except for reading about the fourth, of course, but that's recent history for you. He shook his head. If you want me to show you something that would convince you, I don't think anything I had with me survived the battle. I was half naked at the end there, which is kind of embarrassing. What was left was suffused with demonic chakra, and destroyed, the third agreed. I like that jacket, Naruto muttered tiredly. Why is this so difficult? He looked away nervously to avoid the harsh gaze of the old man that was decidedly less benevolent than usual. His mind was drawing a blank. I can tell you how Rasengan works. No, there's more people who can do that. You need something else, something unique, the Hiraishin, maybe. Yes, that's a good one. I saw you using that technique. True, Sarutobi agreed. It hardly proves your claims, though. The Hiraishin has long been a technique that's highly coveted by many neighboring countries, not the least of which is Iwa, which has dared quite a few transgressions across the border of late. He puffed on his long pipe, scowling. In fact, 2 spies were captured just this morning, taking advantage of the weakened state of the village. I'm not from Iwa, and besides, no one else but me and my father knows how to perform that technique. Naruto exclaimed. That's why it was such a big step for me to start using it. It's how I screwed up and got in this mess in the first place. I'm probably one of the only people who could do what I did. The third Hokage puffed on his pipe, narrowing his eyes. Perhaps, but with only your word for it, and with the author of the technique. The third hesitated for a moment, and his eyes dimmed. Dead, or worse. That leaves me with a potentially stolen technique in a village in which one of the founding clans prizes its knowledge for taking foreign techniques. I'm not a bloody Uchiha, Naruto sputtered in outrage. Who the hell ever heard of a blonde one, anyway? And do I look like I've got pink eye? He rubbed his eyes, aghast. The third sighed. You must see, please consider my position, Naruto-san. More than 36 spies are captured each year, most of which are immediately handed over to the interrogation department. Quite a few of them have stories that are considerably more believable than your own. He shook his head. An attack such as this one would be the perfect time to slip someone through our defenses, and several have tried, as I mentioned. It is mercy on my part that allows you to remain in the hospital, rather than locked in one of our deepest cells, brought to reveal your every secret." Naruto shivered, gulping. "Why you wouldn't, right?" He cringed, wondering whether or not he could have withstood something like that. Ibiki was really good at it. "I should have listened to Iruka-sensei in the academy. He always told me that I'd need those vague stories about the previous wars someday." He froze in realization. Iruka-sensei. Yes, I can use that. Amino Iruka is one of the new orphans. His parents got killed in the attack. "So he is. Can you give me more names?" Sarutobi asked, looking rather unimpressed. Naruto realized with an uncomfortable twinge that knowing details of who died in the attack was just as much something a spy would know. An echo of disappointment rang in the old man's voice. "Orphans." Naruto glanced to his younger self. "I didn't really know many of them, even though I was one myself. I didn't have many friends growing up. I was more into pranks than memorizing things, anyway. I know all the nooks and crannies from the hospital to the east wall, but names." Naruto sighed, then perked up. Maybe I can tell something about Kakashi-sensei? The Sharingan, maybe? I know that it's from Uchiha Obito, his teammate that died in the Third Shinobi World War. Kakashi goes to visit the memorial stone every day to speak to him. Was that common knowledge then? Well, now? It wasn't in my time, at least. Naruto frowned once more. He should have started getting everywhere late by now, since he wants to keep paying homage to Obito. He paused, shivering. Actually, Obito isn't dead. The third's eyes pinned him down after that statement, merciless in their intensity. Is that so? Do you know where to find him? Naruto narrowed his eyes. Well, I think he fought my father just before I got here, since he's involved with the attack. He wears a mask these days, pretending to be Uchiha Madara. It's weird. I imagine that he's still near the village, but he has this teleporting technique with those fancy Sharingan eyes of his that makes him really tough to catch. Where would we find him? Sarutobi repeated. I don't know where exactly. Naruto exclaimed, groaning. I just know that Dad couldn't take him out, not after he went to lick his wounds, in some weird alternate dimension of his own. Kakashi-sensei can do the same sort of thing, though probably not yet in this time. Maybe I should look into that. The third rubbed his brow. So, you're saying that we can't check that claim within a short time frame, then? You are not making things easier for yourself, you must realize. Naruto sighed defeatedly. I can try to think of something else, he said, casting his younger counterpart a short, warm look. My name, for example, it's from one of Ero Jiraiya-sensei's books, you know. Is it? Sarutobi raised an eyebrow. I don't think that something like that would be proof of much. Jiraiya writes many books. It's not something to be proud of, either. Not from bloody Icha Icha, Naruto snapped. It's probably not common knowledge. My name is from Jiraiya-sensei's first book. Tales of a Gutsy Ninja. It wasn't really that popular, but it's one of his best, in my opinion. Naruto sighed, smiling slightly. Jiraiya-sensei was the kind of person who wished for peace. He believed that with writing that book, he could slowly change the world for the better. You know, the main character was actually based on the words of his student from the village of Rain, a boy called Nagato. He balled his fist. I will break the curse. If there is such a thing as peace, I will find it. That's what he said. My father must have liked the book's message a lot, and he probably hoped for me to grow up like the Naruto from the story. I like to think that I did well. There was a soft creaking from the corner of the room, the opening of a door, and Sarutobi turned slightly, frowning. Jiraiya grinned nervously as he peeked around the frame. The white-haired nin, seemingly unaware of how tense the atmosphere inside was, quickly stepped inside, closing the door behind him. Oi, no talking behind my back, now. Naruto felt his eyes watering against his will, but how could he not? Jiraiya had always been someone that he wished he had spent more time with, even after being on the road with him for years. He was someone dear to him that he could not save in the end. How many times had he wished that he would have been there, together with the man, when he faced the 6 paths of pain? Ero Sennin, he breathed as the third sent a short annoyed glare at the white-haired man. What? Jiraiya held the Hokage's look calmly, completely nonplussed. I was getting bored out there, listening in. Besides, he is talking about interesting things. He turned to Naruto, raising an eyebrow. He looked very much like Naruto remembered, even though his hair was a little shaggier, his frame a little lighter. He was probably precisely the same person regardless of age, anyway. He reached into a pocket and held a little booklet yellowed around the corners. Few people have read this, and I suppose there's barely anyone who would know about that particular quote. How did you come to this knowledge? Naruto smiled slightly, just staring at his old sensei. Actually, Nagato told me, and Fukasaku showed me that book after you. He almost choked on the words. His father had always been a dream of the past, someone he wished to know, but never could. Seeing him again was a miracle, and even though it was short, and the frustration from being unable to change the flow of history hurt terribly, it seemed like it was meant to be that way. After all these years, it was very difficult to converse with the third. The old man had died, leaving him only pain and a feeling of emptiness. Jiraiya was another of his regrets. After you died, do you have anything else you could say? Sarutobi asked in exasperation. You claimed that you are from the future, you must know something more? It is all right, we'll have to use the next best thing. Jiraiya stood straighter, and Naruto was reminded just how serious his sensei could get if he wanted to. You could tell us something about that future, couldn't you? You mentioned losing everything again, earlier. What happened in the past that you remember, during the Kyuubi attack? It was probably the biggest loss for Konoha in its history, Naruto started slowly. I can't guess at the huge number of civilians and shinobi alike who were killed that day, whole clans wiped from the village. I lost my family. I lost half of my heritage. When my father died, the other Oji-san took back the mantle of Hokage. And he decided to keep my origins away from me for my own safety. That's why I was known Uzumaki, not Namikaze. He paused to take in just how much younger Jiraiya looked, after all. Leaner, more standoffish, yet with the same glint of thoughtfulness and trickery in his eyes. That bit of him proved to be as timeless as the stories about his perversions. I don't think much changed since I arrived so late. And the future, well, it'll take years before many of the things I remember will come around. Jiraiya nodded gravely, then looked nervously at his old teacher before he leaned over. Say, how about my books? Are they more famous in the future? The third just stared for a moment, sighing in disgust. Yes, actually, Naruto said, frowning. Kakashi-sensei buys them as soon as they come out, for example. He stared incredulously at the white-haired nin. Are you seriously asking me about that, now? Well, maybe you know how I'm going to end my current one. Jiraiya smirked. Come on, you're an adult, you must have snuck a peek sometime. What? Naruto spluttered. Ero Sennin, stop this nonsense. I don't remember the books that well. I only ever completely read Icha Tactics, and that was because you had me helping with the editing, and it was published years in the future, anyway, so you probably haven't started yet. Besides, you always change your endings at least a couple of times before sending them in. You can't expect me to know what your current one is. He knows me well, Jiraiya announced, smirking. You were an editor, EH? I wouldn't leave some stranger anywhere near my drafts, so we must have been pretty close. Oh, now I know. Naruto let out a beaming smile. I've got it. He pointed a finger accusingly towards Sandaime, sticking out his tongue. The old man here, he always keeps at least the latest volume of the Icha hidden under his bed. He's secretly a pervert. Sarutobi spluttered in protest, though his cheeks colored, and Jiraiya let loose a booming laugh. Sensei, you should have told me you liked the books. I would have sent you advance copies. The third collected himself in a matter of seconds, but his expression wasn't as cold as before. It is not something you can officially condone, not if you want to be taken seriously. Besides, I read them for the excellent descriptions of foreign villages. Villages? He's telling the truth, isn't he? Jiraiya laughed till there were tears in his eyes. So all the talk about unbecoming behavior was hokum? All these times I had to listen to you and Tsunade ganging up on me? Sensei, you old monkey. I don't have to explain myself to you, Sarutobi muttered. Jiraiya, why are you letting yourself be distracted by this? No, this is gold. Jiraiya kept up the bickering, far too amused to stop. Which part was your favorite in my last novel, then? Naruto chuckled along merrily. It was a welcome sight to have some relief from the earlier tense atmosphere, and he relished in the genuine amusement that Jiraiya displayed. After such a nightmarish start, it felt like he had taken the first steps home. His chuckling soon turned into a laughter, and holding to his hurting side, bandages stretched to their limits, he laughed in tune with the toad sage. The stress from before, the feelings of loss and hopelessness washed away for that short moment of relief. A child cried out, and everyone stopped, and Jiraiya coughed embarrassedly. Little Naruto had woken up by the loud shouts of the adults. Naruto looked at his younger self aghast, clamping a hand over his mouth. Sorry, he muttered for no one in particular. Kinda forgot. Jiraiya looked rather uncomfortable having woken a child himself, so he moved forward and scooped the baby in his arms. Hey, little stuff, calm down, he said, smiling at the child. It's unbecoming of a future shinobi to be such a crybaby. He is a baby, Ero Sennin, cut him some slack, Naruto said. What do you expect from him at that age? The child calmed down quickly, fascinated by the white strands of hair that fell into his reach, and soon he tried to touch it. He could not quite reach the white mane yet, but not for lack of trying. Feisty one, Jiraiya said, and he turned the child to face his bandaged counterpart. Look how grumpy you might grow up. Better not let that happen, right? Naruto's mouth fell open. You believe me? I'm allowing you the benefit of doubt. Jiraiya said, smiling slightly. It's not the same as believing, but not the same as disbelieving, either. It's subtle. You believe me? Naruto laughed carelessly. Thanks, Jiraiya-sensei, I knew I could count on you. Yeah, don't look too much into it. Jiraiya shrugged, rocking the child gently. We're still not sure if we can count on you. I suppose we'll find out. Honestly, I doubt you're a spy, because if you were, you would probably pass as the worst excuse for one that I've ever seen. If you were going to lie about this stuff, about time travel, I'd expect any decent spy to have a long and detailed list of obscure facts to establish the truth. Naruto grumbled in annoyance. I wasn't that bad at infiltration. I'd hope not, Jiraiya agreed. Sarutobi crossed his arms. Are you sure about this, Jiraiya? No, the white-haired nin snorted. But I need to look at the seal, and it's easier to do so with cooperation. If what future Naruto here says is true, he must have one too. Suffice to say that faking a seal like that would be pretty dangerous if it's just for the sake of spying. Do you need help examining the seal? Naruto asked, lowering a hand to his stomach. I could give you a rundown, or… No, Jiraiya said, grinning contently, like a man presented with an exciting challenge. I don't want to be bothered by my preconceptions. Alright. Naruto nodded and fell silent. Jiraiya laid the child back into the crib and touched a hand to his belly. There was a slight pulse of chakra, and the seal flickered to life. The toad sage hummed softly, and leaned in to look closer. The baby muttered excitedly and managed to touch a few white strands. Sarutobi joined the toad sage on the other side of the crib, his expression impassive. Naruto doubted that this was the first time that the Hokage looked at that particular seal. Jiraiya traced one of the lines with his finger, and the little Naruto gurgled, shying away from the sensation. Interesting. Very interesting. It's amazing to see it in person. The key was a good clue, but this is even more exciting. You have the key, Naruto commented. Good, I hope that the toads delivered it to you. Please, don't say anything, Jiraiya muttered. Let me think. It took a good 5 minutes until Jiraiya moved again. He pushed more chakra into the seal. After a few more attempts, he seemingly gave up. The Kyuubi is definitely locked away and the seal looks both powerful and as safe as it can. I'll have to do this again, preferably in a couple more months, he said to Sarutobi. I don't have much to add to what we talked before, and the bit about chakra absorption was spot on. The kid is never going to run out of chakra. I see. Sarutobi frowned. It's a heavy burden, he whispered to the child. Your father would be proud of you. He turned back to Jiraiya. Do you need the child for comparisons? I think we could move him with the other children. Especially if he's safe. Do you have to? Naruto spoke up again as Jiraiya moved closer to him. I don't want him to be left alone. I remember being lonely when I was little. We can't keep him here, especially when you're getting better. Sarutobi sighed slightly. I promise to make sure he's taken care of for a few days. It's not like he was held here from the very beginning, and he won't go to an orphanage for a while, if at all. You moved him in here, just hours before I woke, didn't you? Naruto asked. That's why this room looks so unsuited for children. You wanted to see how I would react upon seeing myself. Neither of the two older men commented on that. Now, other Naruto, brace yourself, Jiraiya said, moving next to him with a frown as he looked down at the heavily bandaged figure. I'm going to remove some of your bandages now. Naruto simply shivered as the first layers were removed, but when the final, blood-soaked bits were ripped free, he choked on the sharp pain. There it was, covered by only a last layer of sticky gauze. The wound that Kurama had given him. It was partially healed over, but Naruto had to admit that it was probably the worst wound that he could remember getting, and those tended to close nearly instantly before. This is going to hurt even more. The bandages got stuck with all this blood. Why didn't you say that you were bleeding? Sorry for gritting my teeth and bearing it, Naruto murmured. I got used to quickly healing injuries like this. The famed Uzumaki longevity? Sarutobi had moved the crib closer to the door, and was lingering there, watching Naruto and Jiraiya both. The Kyuubi. The healing I inherited doesn't even get close from what I can tell. Naruto choked out as he felt the last bandage being torn with a yank. Careful, it was stuck, the white-haired shinobi complained half-heartedly. What I was supposed to do? Naruto wiped tears of pain from his eyes. Could have done it slower. Just you wait, I'll figure out a way to pay you back for that. Shush. Jiraiya touched his stomach. It looks almost healed already. His hand was warm on the chilly skin. It was strange to feel something else than the rough pressing of the bandages, and he sighed. When Jiraiya introduced a drop of chakra, it felt weird, but non-intrusive, only brushing at his chakra pathways. Curious, careful, considerate. Well? Naruto looked down, the seal wasn't visible. Huh, maybe you did it wrong. The nin grumbled. Could you use some chakra yourself? It should work better than my own. I don't want to overstimulate your coils from the outside, it could hurt you further. You'll need to remove some of the suppression seals, then, Naruto said petulantly. Fine. Jiraiya quickly unraveled some of the marks etched on the bandages. There, that should be enough for what we need. Naruto closed his eyes, focusing. He called up some chakra, bubbling up in him like an old friend, and his former, or was it future, teacher retracted the arm in surprise. That's it. Interesting, Jiraiya repeated for the third time. Strange, it's like a ghost. What? Naruto squinted his eyes, and noted that there were nearly invisible lines that stood out on his stomach, marking his seal. When Kurama had been torn out of him, it had to have destabilized the seal. He concentrated, searching for the energy of the seal deep inside. Something was still keeping the remains of the seal going. He'd have to look into it. He relaxed the chakra he had called up. I don't think I can hold it much longer than that. You still left some of the suppression, and I'm pretty weak. It's enough, clearly, the seal exists. Someone is going to come by to change the bandages, so you don't get infected. Try not to move too much, since it'll be a while yet before you can reasonably get up again. He turned slightly to face the third. I think that's enough, for now, sensei. We should bring little Naruto to the other squirts, and get working on rebuilding things. Let's go. We will speak again, the third said to Naruto before he turned and followed the white-haired sage outside. Just like that, they were gone, taking the crib and its contents with them. Naruto was left sitting there, staring at the wall in front of him, his stomach out in the open, the wound feeling weird out in the air. He was alone again. He grinned victoriously as he reached for his stomach. Someone was going to come and change his bandages? Without reapplying the complete array of the suppression seals first? He chuckled to himself. Sloppy, arrow senin, very sloppy. In a swift but painful movement, Naruto placed his hands in the clone seal. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, he breathed, channeling a huge part of what was there of his yet fickle chakra, especially when it was still sealed away. A bandaged, sick-looking clone flickered into existence, wobbling slightly on his legs, outside the suppressing seals. Yosh, the clone wheezed out, looking down at himself and wincing. Damn, I look terrible. Naruto coughed. Move it, you stupid clone, before someone sees you. Of course, boss. And with a gust of wind, the battered clone was gone, and the door thumped quietly at his departure. A flash of green jumped nimbly between buildings, easily jumping gaps and across rooftops as he attempted to keep up. Not far ahead, a black shape crowned with silver made the trip seem easy. The half-moon shone down on bright silver hair, and its owner stopped quite suddenly on a flat rooftop. The green beast stopped next to him, curious. You seem preoccupied, my rival. Guy noted, unusually subdued, at least, for him. He looked out over the village. A large part of it lay in ruins, and though this side of town had mostly weathered the storm, There were few families that had not lost anyone in the sudden attack of the Kyuubi. I feel like I should have helped, Kakashi replied uneasily, shaking his head. I can see why they kept us back. It would be stupid to sacrifice the people who would need to rebuild after this was over, but now. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. It feels awful. Guy raised an eyebrow. Still, the village survives, and the power of youth shall replenish it in time, so that it is greater than before. Kakashi rolled his eye, glaring half-heartedly at Guy. If you're about to go into one of your rants, he broke off, smiling slightly. Trying to distract me, huh? He sighed. I suppose it worked. Yosh. Guy gave a thumbs up. Still, I can tell that you are distracted, and you must have wanted to come here for a reason. He glanced aside, across the road. I suspect I know your intentions. But, are you certain that this is what you want to do, my eternal rival? Or that you should? Kakashi sniffed. Did you say something? How very hip of you, Guy declared, but his eyes betrayed that he understood. They were serious, focused. I can understand your wish to see your sensei, even though he is seriously injured, but surely the Hokage would permit visitors, if he were ready for such a thing. Should you not wait? Guy, Kakashi muttered, watching the rooftop of the hospital. Yes? Guy flashed him a smile, the huge eyebrows moving into position to hover above his expression as distractingly as it was possible and more. Have you reconsidered? No, I was going to say that you should keep it down. I'm trying to get in without getting caught. And you're kind of an eyesore already without all the talking. He smirked. And yes, I am going to break in there. It's been days, I want to see what's going on. At least I want to be sure that sensei will be okay. He looked down, frowning. I don't have many people left. Guy nodded soberly. So be it. I shall help you with your quest. His smile returned. If I cannot do so, I shall run 300 laps around Konoha on my elbows. Kakashi planted a hand on his face, covering up his only open eye. Just, let's do it silently, alright? I'll need you to keep an eye out. Are we going to take down that pair of Anbu? Guy asked, gesturing to the two shinobi that were hidden by the entrance, though their shadows were just barely visible in the moonlight. I am not sure if assaulting Konoha Nin is very youthful, especially in this time. We're going to sneak past them, of course. We're ninja, aren't we? Kakashi took another few seconds to observe the Anbu by the doors, before his attention shifted to the roof. There, two more slowly made their way around the perimeter. They were far too jumpy to make this easy. Follow me closely if you want to get in, and be quiet. Yosh. Kakashi slid his Hite-8 upwards, revealing the red eye of Obito's Sharingan. He focused on the Anbu on the roof, the Uchiha eye providing a short glimpse to the future, a hint of what the men would do. These Anbu were good. They had a pattern that would have been unpredictable to almost any shinobi, except for those with the Sharingan. Go! Kakashi mouthed and he sped off, running up to the hospital wall in total silence, muffling the sound of his footsteps with chakra, even as he weaved a genjutsu below him, blocking the sight of both him and Guy from the Anbu at the entrance. They still had another second or two, tops. Nearly at the top of the wall, Kakashi placed another genjutsu, a tiny one, that held for only the split second that it took to flip himself through the topmost window, followed by Guy. It broke, then, hopefully the Anbu had not sensed the chakra usage. Guy quickly snapped the window closed behind him, and sighed in relief. Where to now? Kakashi quickly glanced around, making sure to keep totally silent, for fear of setting Guy off again. There were patients here, of course, but with cover of darkness and silence, none had woken up yet. He sneaked out into the corridor, with Guy a couple of steps behind, remarkably quiet in his own right, despite the fact that he was still wearing his obnoxious green outfit. Kakashi forced himself to ignore his desire to comment on it. Silence. Gesturing carefully to Guy, he made sure that he was aware of the need for silence, before he finally spoke. We should go to look for more guards, he suggested in a whisper. They wouldn't leave the Hokage unguarded, and 4 seems on the low end, even if most are busy in town. Very astute observation. Guy flashed another smile. I think I hear someone walking in our direction now, we should hide. Kakashi gestured his understanding, and flipped himself upwards. He affixing himself to the ceiling before he stilled completely, breathing only as much as he required. The trick in hiding was not really to weave a genjutsu constantly. That got tiring, and plenty of shinobi could sense them. But to make sure that you didn't stand out from the environment, so that there was never a reason to go looking for intruders at all. Guy disappeared in a tiny puff of smoke. He had hidden in a small niche behind a minor henge and a potted plant, and Kakashi was honestly a little impressed. Someone walked slowly yet assuredly towards them from the next hallway, and Kakashi almost cursed himself when he realized it had to be another Anbu. By the gait of the man, Kakashi figured he was tired, which was good, since tired meant unobservant. The figure wearing a mask depicting a rat's face came around the corner, apparently on patrol. Something was off, though, and Kakashi only just managed to prevent himself from taking a quick breath in surprise. The Anbu wore a standard uniform and his brown hair was cut short, but despite his tired gait he seemed completely at ease, which was definitely not what an Anbu should be while guarding someone as high profile as the sitting Hokage. Kakashi's Sharingan barely had time to scream a warning before the Anbu looked up, not slowing down at all as his dark eyes captured Kakashi's. "Yo!" Frozen in total shock for a moment, Kakashi failed to answer. He had not even sensed chakra use, which implied the Anbu had known he was there from remarkable sensory perception alone. The silver-haired Junin debated whether to jump in and take out the Anbu, when the nin saluted him, raising 2 fingers to the top of the mask. He moved on, unperturbed. For a split second the man glanced to his side, towards Guy, but he ignored that, too. Kakashi dropped on the ground after the Anbu was gone, utterly confused. "What just happened?" he asked, baffled. "Maybe that Anbu knows us?" Guy suggested, appearing at his side momentarily, a few stray leaves still stuck in his hair. "That must mean that we're on the right track, does it not? It must be his way of saying that he's not going to turn you in." Kakashi frowned uncertainly, but he could find no more plausible explanations. "Yeah, let's go with that." He suddenly faltered, and cursed silently. He had been using the Sharingan for too long, and it was getting him confused. The moment when the nin had looked up, he could have sworn that there was something wrong with the man, but he was not so sure now. What if they had just let an intruder pass? Then again, he couldn't just go and tell anyone. While sneaking in forbidden parts of the hospital, I saw this shady-looking nin that was obviously an Anbu. "Let's move on, and hope that's our weirdness for the day," Kakashi mumbled and followed his own command, walking towards the corner that the mysterious nin had come from. He left the Sharingan open, even though it was draining him a lot, just in case he'd need it. A few turns later, Kakashi warned Guy to stay, narrowing his eyes. There, exiting a room at the end of the hall that was flanked by another Anbu, was a medical nin. Kakashi was sure he caught a glimpse of the yellow-haired man half sitting in the bed behind her, and he could not suppress a satisfied grin as his conjecture was confirmed. Minato-sensei was here. Jackpot. There was no way that 6 different Anbu would be guarding the hospital, and the wing that Kakashi had decided to check first was one of the most secure places in the whole building. It made sense. "I'll return in the morning to change the bandages again," the medical nin said in a sweet voice. "Please, rest." "Thank you," someone replied in a weak and rough voice, and Kakashi stilled. Yes, this was the place. The Anbu closed the door behind the medical nin, who quickly walked off in the opposite direction. A medical nin would have been no match for the precognitive abilities of the Sharingan, but this was different. The Anbu was tall and his eyes, though half closed, were undoubtedly fully alert of everything that went on. This was one person that they couldn't pass without getting into his line of sight. There was only one choice, here. Carefully signing his intentions to Guy, he focused chakra to his eye, shuddering slightly as he felt himself weakening. Flashing around the corner, the 2 Junin were at the Anbu's position before he had time to draw a kunai, and as Guy grasped the man's arm before it could reach his belt, Kakashi unleashed his jutsu. His Sharingan twirled as Kakashi focused his genjutsu upon its victim. The man's eyes rolled up, and he slumped down. "Sweet dreams," Kakashi wheezed out, everything spinning around due to the fast chakra drain, and he grasped Guy's shoulder, just as the latter caught the nin before he could fall and make a ruckus. Silence remained, and Kakashi sighed in relief as he raised himself up again. "Go, my rival." Guy showed him a thumbs up and changed into a ko of the downed Anbu. "Someone has to guard the entrance until you finish your business with your sensei. Don't take too long. My henge is no match for a determined Anbu, I am sure." Kakashi grunted and threw the disabled shinobi over his shoulder, though the weight was a bit much. The genjutsu would only work for 5 minutes or so, but just in case, he bound the ANBU's hands with a short chain, so that he could at least reapply it. Then, he opened the door and stepped inside. Kakashi? There was an incredulous exclamation from the inside, and the door slammed shut. Thank Kami, Kakashi breathed out, more relieved than he would care to admit, and he dropped the disabled nin like a sack of potatoes. I thought you died. What are you doing in here? The man that could only have been his sensei asked in disbelief, but was that the sound of disappointment Kakashi heard in his voice? He followed the man's gaze to the unconscious body at his feet. It was necessary. Kakashi stepped closer, almost falling onto his knees right next to his sensei's bed as the chakra drain of his eye caught up with him, but he ignored the discomfort. He tore down the mask in a quick move, and flashed a short grin as his teacher's blue eyes widened. I thought I had lost the last. Kakashi muttered tiredly. The attack, I thought that you might have died, and that I'd be. He shook his head. I just had to see you, on the off chance that the rumors were true. Thank heavens, they're not. It was only then that Kakashi took in the extent of the bandages on his teacher. There was barely an unbandaged area to be seen, save for his eyes, and even now, there was a tiny bit of blood seeping into the freshly changed linens. There were so many wounds, it was a miracle that Minato-sensei could speak. Then, Kakashi looked into bandaged face, and found the watchful and puzzled blue eyes that met his own. Kakashi jumped in surprise as Minato suddenly twitched with a spasm of pain, and fell back onto the bed with a whimper. I didn't use it, was Kakashi's first thought. What if I did? The second thought was scarier than the first, and he grasped his teacher by the shoulder, before letting go as the man jerked away. Minato-sensei, he called fearfully, hoping that this was not his fault, or that he had arrived just in time to see him die. Desperate, he moved his Hite-8 down, hoping that breaking the Sharingan's hold would help. It didn't. Minato looked completely unresponsive, and Kakashi had no idea what to do. Naruto was confused. He had just had his bandages changed and wounds cleaned, and wasn't expecting anyone to show up until the early morning at the very least. However, this happened. Kakashi had torn inside his isolated room just after the medical nin excused herself, much younger and a lot more expressive than Naruto had honestly expected of him. Before he could explain that he wasn't Minato, and he had no idea how to get that idea out of the boy's head without hurting him, the touch of the Sharingan sent him spinning. What was going on? Genjutsu? No, even in his weakened state, he would have at least noticed it, and he was in enough pain that he would probably snap out almost immediately. No, it was like diving into the prison seal. Maybe his own version of the seal reacted to the presence of the Sharingan, as it had always agitated the Kyuubi too? The remnants of Kurama's chakra could have been reacting to the cursed eyes. The wife fled as Naruto stood up. He was inside his head, in the old sewer-like part of his mind, where pipes flowed every which way across the walls, and the huge prison gate was. This was where Kurama lived, after a fashion. It was empty, now. Or was it? Something familiar called out to him. Now that it was stronger, Naruto realized that it had been calling out for a while. He had just dismissed it, a distant hum that seemed to fall just out of reach. It was chakra, the soft hum of chakra that flowed under his skin, yet not quite his own. It was familiar, very familiar. Dad? Naruto asked, turning around, trying to locate the source of his father's chakra. He quickly deduced the only likely place where it could be, even if it made no sense for it to be there, since it had been exhausted already. He walked towards the giant gate of his prison. There, something moved. Very slowly, the dim light of the hallway brightened, and thin bars of light appeared behind the gate, growing longer with time. There, sitting patiently behind the center of the gate, was a man. The figure moved slowly, his long blonde bangs catching the dim light from outside the cage as his head lifted. Two sky-blue eyes opened, focusing on Naruto. The fourth Hokage sat cross-legged in a few inches of water, though he seemed unconcerned with the fact that it was soaking his clothes. His long white cloak drifted on the surface, surrounding him on all sides, the flame-like edges vanishing in the darkness, giving it a tattered appearance. Naruto, he said, and a weary smile appeared at last. It's good to see you. Wah! Naruto ran over to the bars in consternation, staring in disbelief through the bars, though he knew that reaching inside was impossible, as long as the gate was locked. His dead father, had somehow ended up in his head, and on the wrong side of Kurama's seal. How the heck did this happen? You, here, what? He shook his head. What? Namikaze Minato laughed softly, a clear sound that seemed out of place in the gloom of this eerie room, with its huge towering gate. The man simply observed, finally nodding. Ah, Naruto. I see now that I should have trusted Kushina more. It was a mother's intuition, I suppose. She knew who you were, even when I was too caught up in the moment. I'm sorry about that. Ah, yeah. Naruto rubbed the back of his head nervously, staring. I did kinda spring it all on you, didn't I? Didn't really introduce myself and all that. He sighed. I'm sorry. It was my mistake. Minato slumped slightly, but his gaze never left Naruto. How old are you, now? Naruto blinked. T23, why? 23 years old. Minato hummed slightly. Almost the same age as me, you know, that's strange. At least you're not older still. I wouldn't know what to think if I was younger than my child. He laughed silently to himself, though Naruto wondered if it was genuine. Finally he stopped, and calm eyes met Naruto's again. As for why I'm here. He reached out, jerking his hand back from the bars of the gate when he got close, and a little spark arced to his finger. When I took the Kyuubi's chakra from inside it, when I forced it to disperse so that it could be sealed, I was doubtful about how seriously I could take your supposed identity. Though I doubted you meant harm, I took precautions. During our fight, I placed a seal on you. He paused for a long moment. I sealed away my own chakra so that it would go to you after I died. Just in case, so that I could finish what I started, one way or another. Naruto's eyes widened slightly. You made a seal that worked after you died? How? Minato had the dignity to look embarrassed. There are techniques to channel one's chakra like that, even if it's usually fatal. But I had little reason to suspect I would survive, so it seemed justified. It is not unlikely Kage Bunshin, a favored technique of your own if I am not mistaken. If I had used it as intended, it would have briefly taken over your body, just long enough to finish the sealing. Dad, that's amazing. Naruto grinned broadly. I got started with sealing and I'm pretty good, but that's on another level. Considering you sealed the Kyuubi well, I would say you are more than pretty good. Don't be shy, Minato said confidently. When you finished the sealing and that spark of my chakra faded, thankfully unnecessary, I found myself here, instead. Part of me, at least. An echo, perhaps, or a reflection. He looked at his fingers, curling them up and shrugging. As I was not sure about your identity, and I was short on time regardless, I hadn't taken into account the presence of your seal. Much less an empty one. As it repaired itself, foreign chakra was drawn in, and locked away, including mine. It is temporary, I'm sure, but it gives us certain opportunities. I caught you in the seal? Naruto said, shivering. The Shinigami should have. The Shinigami got his sacrifice. Consider me a clone, if that is easier. He reached out again, smiling sadly. Don't worry, my stay here is voluntary. I'm sure that if I dispel myself, so to say, my chakra will join the rest of me. In a few days' time, at most, that will happen on its own. But, let's not do that quite yet, shall we? Naruto nodded eagerly. We spoke like this before, you know, he said, his voice wavering. The seal was breaking. You told me you had left your chakra to help me, should it ever fail. You brought me back from releasing the 9 tails into the world, but your chakra was exhausted after that. You told me we'd probably never meet again, even if I. He swallowed thickly. The same with, Mom. I know, Minato said softly, and he raised an eyebrow at Naruto's incredulous glance. I may be locked up behind these bars, but I happen to know this seal pretty well. I modified it quite a bit, and clearly you must have learned its structure somewhere along the way, since you knew exactly how to handle it. Your own seal is a little different, I've noticed. You reforged it anew at some point? Regardless, I figured it out. I got more than I bargained for, though, when I tried to gain some understanding of my host. You were unconscious. Your defenses were completely gone. Naruto scowled. You broke into my head? After a fashion, Minato admitted ruefully. I saw very little, only that which seemed especially relevant. Your trip here, the Kyuubi, the truth of your identity, our other meeting. Your origins. Only a half-forgotten dream rather than a full-blown memory, but still the best I could get. He sighed deeply. Ah, Naruto. I did mess up your life, didn't I? Twice now, it seems, in two different eventualities. It's not so bad, Naruto mumbled, rubbing his stomach. Besides, the Kurama I knew is gone now, and even with all the benefits of his presence, it's sort of nice not to be a Jinchuriki for once. I'm like Gaara, now. If he can be a Kage without the Ichibi. I hope I don't count as a Biju, Minato agreed, smiling. Naruto looked down, tired. Dad, what do I do? What the hell do I do? He sunk to the floor, gazing at his flickering reflection in the water at his feet. This isn't where I'm supposed to be. I have a life, back home. The Fourth Shinobi World War was over, there was peace. What about Hinata, and Sakura, and everyone else? And I was going to finally, he looked up, then, troubled. The Hiraishin has its limits. It can't travel to what doesn't exist yet, I can't go back, can I? Minato remained silent. I was going to beat your record, Dad. Naruto said at last, and his voice trembled. 23 years old, a year earlier than even you. I was going to finally do it, fulfill my dream. And now, Hokage? Minato inquired, almost breathlessly. Naruto glanced up, and was caught off guard by the twinkling eyes that met his, filled with so much pride that his breath hitched. A grin split Minato's face, then. Godem Hokage, Namikaze Naruto? I like it. Naruto chuckled to himself. Rokudame, actually, and sort of the second one. It was a bit of a mess in the war. He scratched the back of his head nervously. And I go by Uzumaki Naruto. Used to be safer, you know. And the old man thought it was best if I didn't find out about, well, you, until I was older. He shrugged. In the end, it was you that told me about my origins, which you have probably already seen. Then I punched you. Yes. Minato snorted. You must have gotten that from Kushina. Probably, Naruto agreed, smiling warmly. She and I got along, the one time we met. A little of the cold misery seemed to fall away as he thought of that meeting. Though I guess you can tell that I got a few other things from you. He ran a hand through his hair, winking. Honestly, I am still unsure why I never made the connection. Guess I don't look in the mirror enough. And the statue, of course, doesn't portray all the colors that well. Minato just stared for a while, and Naruto fidgeted under that gaze. You grew up to be a lot like your parents, he said. That's good. He nodded. I saw you use the Hiraishin, and I caught that toad summoning too. You've been learning my techniques, I assumed Jiraiya-sensei was involved? For the toads, yes. Naruto looked troubled for a moment. He taught me the Rasengan too, and a few other things, but he died before we could get to the rest. Chin up, Minato ordered light-heartedly. He is alive, you know? Naruto blinked, and thought of the younger Jiraiya that had barged in not long ago. Right, I even talked with him. That's actually very nice. He laughed. I get to speak to him however much I want. Minato smiled kindly after a short pause. So you figured it out, my best technique, without anyone to help you? He whistled. Something to be proud of, you know. I can see that you've got some of the skills a Hokage needs. Whole research teams failed at reproducing it during the war. And they had good reasons to dismantle it. Yes. Well, I did have the advantage of an unlimited number of shadow clones. And it wasn't like I didn't have help, Naruto hedged. Plus Kyuubi and I were sort of friends, so he kept me going. Even if he complained constantly. He shook his head. Listen to me, talking about stuff that technically never happens. That is so messed up. Hey, look at it from my perspective, would you? Minato asked. I got to meet my adult son on the same day he was born. He shrugged. My would-be Hokage's son, at that. Apparently Konoha needed more than just the one yellow flash. And then there's little you, too, practically a dynasty. He blinked. Wait, does that mean that I have twins, now? Except, 20-ish years apart. He frowned. That is so messed up. Tell me about it, Naruto muttered, then paused. You know, there was something I was going to show the other you, but I never really got the opportunity. Naruto raised his hand, and focused. I'm sure it'll work in here, it did when I beat up the fox. Look, a sphere burst into existence, swirling in all directions as the chakra chafed against itself, and then he sharpened it, turning it into a whirling ball of shearing blades of wind. Fuuten. Rasengan. Minato's eyes were wide in astonishment. Is that, you did it? You perfected. Naruto grinned, sweat running down his back. His real body was still in the hospital bed and he couldn't continue on showing off too much. Just a bit more. Oh, I did better than that. But the other stuff is a bit too powerful to pull off in here. I'd worry about blowing my head off. The Rasen Shuriken can be thrown, you know. Tsunade Ban put it in the secret scroll. An S-rank technique, oh yeah. Amazing, Minato exclaimed. Akashina, our son's a genius. Naruto snickered. Not really, but thanks. Jiraiya-sensei and Kakashi-sensei helped me with it. And it took a lot of time, and shadow clones by the hundreds. He shivered as he thought back to that training session, especially with the added urgency that was part of it at the time. Right now, it seemed like he made an impossible amount of progress in a short time, going from a B rank to an S rank shinobi in only a few years. I'm feeling inadequate now, Minato said, nervously scratching the back of his head. It took me 3 years to develop the Rasengan, and I never did get around to the rest of it. Yeah, Jiraiya-sensei was impressed when I pulled it off in a week. Minato coughed. What? Tsunade Ban made a bet with me. I spent the whole week working on it until I pulled it off. I'm sure you can find that memory in here, somewhere. He laughed at his father's expression. I must be an idiot, Minato said in a tortured voice, slumping. Naruto snorted. You're still considered the finest ninja that Konoha ever produced, you can't whine. Minato rolled his eyes. Yes, well, Jiraiya-sensei does have a big mouth like that. I think he wants everyone to think that he's the best teacher ever, now that he's too old to keep up with the younger folk. The Raikage agrees with him. He raised an eyebrow. Actually, you sort of become a legend, heroic sacrifice, and all that. Oh, brother. Dad. Minato twitched, looking a little uncomfortable, then he looked serious again. Naruto, as nice as a little meeting is, there are things we should discuss. Important things. He paused. With me gone, I'm sure that they'll pick a new Hokage. Actually, the last time this happened, the third took up the hat again. He frowned. You know, the third has this weird theory that I might be you, just with brain damage or something. So, I have no clue how things are gonna go this time around. Me with brain damage? I can see why they thought that. Minato chuckled at Naruto's affronted expression. I kid. In any case, I need you to relay a message or two, since I seem to be unable. But first, do you know of the masked man that attacked the village? Yes, Naruto sighed, frowning. It's Obito. What? Minato frowned in confusion, and he narrowed his eyes. My Obito? No, how could he? He survived. Why would someone like that ever? He muttered to himself, scowling. I don't understand who could have forced him to behave like that, but I believe you. You would know everything. Obito, it was a mess, Naruto said. Everything has been rather crazy. Just take my word for that, it's been completely hectic. But it all worked out in the end, even if we lost many great people along the way. He sighed. Since I'm here, and I'm probably stuck, maybe I can help. At least I am not leaving you with a mystery to unravel. Minato let out a relieved breath. I was afraid that your future had gone terribly wrong, and you tried to escape with a Hiraishin, but it seems like I worried needlessly. When I tried to find images of your future, I didn't know what any of it meant. He looked away, troubled. Obito, huh? I still have no idea what I should do. Naruto admitted. I always had a goal, or a challenge, but this situation is too difficult even for me to predict. I can write the future again, since it never was written from where we are standing now. Yet, what if I do something that makes it all for the worse? You lived through a shinobi war, and was the Hokage to be, yet you still have doubts about yourself? Minato reached out towards the bars of the gate. There was a tiny speck yellow of lightning zapping right at his fingers as he snatched his hand away at the very last second. Ah, not to worry, it does that. He flexed his fingers gingerly. I meant to say, that you shouldn't be afraid of uncertainty while making choices, since it's the uncertainty itself that proves your wisdom. Quote. Is that a quote? Naruto asked, looking nervously at the gate. Tsunade Ban said something like that when I asked her about the wrong choices. It comes with the hat. Minato winked. Hokage is a position with many responsibilities. A Jinchuriki carries a beast inside, and the Hokage, after a fashion, has to carry the troubles of whole village inside him in the same way. Konoha, it's a beautiful place. Minato found the eyes of his son again, and he shrugged. Yet you are old enough to have known that there are shadows in the hidden village. It comes with what we're taught to do, how we are raised to behave. To kill, to hide, to lie. The will of fire sounds like an unattainable dream, yet where friendship means closing one eye, love means closing both of them. To turn a blind eye to Konoha's faults. You cannot have a perfect world. It is a good dream, however. And pursuing that dream is a worthy cause. I think I understand. Naruto moved to touch the gates. They didn't shock him, but they hummed on that small contact, as if some sort of energy had been flowing through them. What is that? He asked quietly. The seal was built to absorb the Kyuubi chakra into your system. Now, there's no Kyuubi, just me. Minato gestured at himself. My seal is eating you? Naruto's eyes widened and he moved his hand towards the small paper seal hanging on his side of the gate. Don't. Minato jumped forward and got another jolt from the gate, and he sheepishly waved his hand from the sudden shock. If you open it up, this version of me will be lost. But if I leave it be, you will be gone, too. Naruto held the white small patch that could open the gate in a second. And it is hurting you, isn't it? I have a while yet, Minato pointed out. I told you. Are you really sure? Naruto took a step back. This seal is more draining than the one you made, since it was supposed to channel all of the Kyuubi, rather than only a few taels worth. With dread, he realized that his father had become slightly bleaker throughout the conversation. Maybe even transparent. That's even more of a reason to speak about everything, before you go back. Go back. Naruto realized just what had made him aware of the connection and sent him into the depths of his mind. Kakashi. Time flows more slowly here, there is no hurry. Minato frowned. Is Kakashi alright? I hope he is. He has great potential and an even greater heart, yet, his life wasn't kind to him. Kakashi could be a great friend. He was. Naruto grinned. He was the weirdest and most impossible sensei I have ever had. Yet, at the very same time, he also taught me a lot of things I hold dear. And he was the one to tell me the true secret of the Kage Bunshin. Good. I know you must have taught him something too. Naruto laughed. A thing or two. So, you met my Kakashi, Minato said. Just before arriving here, I take it? He looked so young. Naruto said the first thing that came to his mind. When he entered the room, it was like seeing a dream. It was like some teenager just barged in, rather than the veteran I'm used to. Yet, he is that hardened veteran already, don't forget that. He's a product of his age, of this war we have just had. Minato sighed. He has lost great many things in his life, and it seems like it's always losses rather than achievements that shape the people into their true image. He looked so broken just now. I see. Minato crossed his arms and paced around for a while. Maybe, he stilled for a bit. No, you were right, earlier. Days was too a generous estimation. Probably hours instead. You did a good job on the seal. I should commend you. Naruto looked away. Is there anything I could do for you? Protect Konoha. Minato began slowly. Learn. Love. Live. Naruto shook his head. I meant for you. I'd do those things anyway. Minato grinned at that. Well, you could help me say my goodbyes, I suppose. He fell silent for a moment, his smile wavering. Kushina perished together with me. Little Naruto. Take care of him, will you? He could use an older brother, and I hope you would benefit from that. Tell him about me, someday when he will understand. Apologize for me. Of course, that's a given. Anyone else? Sarutobi, that is, the third Hokage. Minato took a deep breath. Tell him that he was right the first time we met. I am crazy enough to sacrifice my life first and think second. Yet, I do not think that he has taught me wrong, and I always had his example to learn from. He stayed silent for a moment. He helped me get ready to be the Hokage, and I really appreciate it. Naruto cocked his head to the side slightly. I never really discussed you with him, but he did mention that you embodied the will of fire. Minato shrugged at the compliment. Next is Jiraiya. There are many things that I'd like to say to Jiraiya-sensei. Most of them things that you will probably tell him yourself, given enough time in his company. Tell him to remain how he always was. Cheerful in the face of danger, serious in the meeting of a council and insightful in all delicate matters. His heart is in a right place, and by moving around the world he has corrected more wrong than I have in my time as Hokage. I'll speak to Ero Sennin for you, Naruto agreed, and he chuckled at Minato's amused expression. I swear, that man never changes. Who else? Ah, Makoto. Minato shook his head. That is not my goodbye to give, but Kushina would have wanted me to, had I survived. I pass on that task to you. Tell her that she helped my wife more than anyone in the village, and that Kushina always hoped to see Sasuke and Naruto play together. Naruto stiffened. She's Sasuke's mother? You knew him, then? I suppose you're about the same age, so that makes sense. It was meant for you to be friends. Friends. Naruto's expression grew serious. Rivals. Teammates. Enemies. What? Minato frowned. What happened? Obito. He arranged the whole Uchiha clan to be murdered before a coup attempt, Naruto said through his clenched teeth. Sasuke ran away from the village, seeking power to fuel his revenge. We fought a few times. But I always kept him as a friend until the end. I see. Minato looked away tiredly. Do not hold it against her, please. She was a good friend to your mother. I won't, Naruto said with conviction. It was long ago, from my point of view, and it never truly happened if I go by today's date. Besides, if I can prevent the massacre, then maybe he won't have such a stick-up his. Naruto, Minato cut in, and he smirked. If you can, save her. Kushina would have appreciated it. Do you even have to ask? Minato looked at him, proud. That leaves Genma's team. I don't have something special to say them. But they know bits and pieces of the Hiraishin. Their own little version of it, in any case. You know of it? Yes. Naruto answered. I asked Namiyashi for help once, after the war was finally over. Those three don't really know the Hiraishin. They are using a mixture of it and a summoning technique, right? Help them out with perfecting what they have, would you? And see to it that they are safe. As safe as a life of an active shinobi can be, anyway. So that's everyone, then? Naruto ran a hand through his hair. Man, for someone who's bad at memorizing, this is a lot of stuff. Minato smirked. There's Shimura Danzo. Tell him that the choices he wants to make, even if they look good at first, will have a price later. Naruto shuddered as he thought of the would-be sixth Hokage. Yeah, don't need to say that twice. I see that you understand what I mean, Minato observed. Danzo, he truly cares about Konoha, he added, thoughtful. If given too much freedom, he would do anything in his power to help the village. And that would be his and Konoha's downfall. Danzo again. Naruto murmured. To borrow a phrase, troublesome. There is one last person that I should leave a message for, though I'd never expected that I'd get the chance. Minato took a deep breath. Obito. Naruto blinked in surprise. Minato looked uncomfortable. You said he's alive. I don't know how to better put this, since I have no idea what I might have done wrong in teaching him. He was always so cheerful and loving. I can't imagine him harming Konoha like that, not willingly. He paused, looking away. If you see him, ask, alright? Ask him why. From the man who watched him grow up. Alright. Naruto had a dangerous gleam in his eyes as he said it. I'm going to find out everything there is to know about that. He sighed. I suppose that was everyone, finally? Minato shrugged helplessly. Well, I don't know if I want you to say something special to anyone else. For shinobi who are loyal, maybe make sure they understand that I am sorry that I couldn't keep protecting them longer, but if I could have, I would. There was a long, uncomfortable pause. Minato sighed. I think, you should tear that seal, after all. What? Naruto shook his head. But you said, my purpose was over the moment I realized that you were my son. My wish was granted the second I learned what you have achieved in your life. I am an echo, Naruto, memories and dreams of the man I was, caught in chakra. Keeping me here would not bring you happiness, be it a couple of hours or even the whole week. It is better to end this in one decisive stroke, one last breath of freedom. Are you sure? Naruto rubbed his eyes with his left hand, while reaching out with his right. Maybe there is another way? Maybe you'll remember something else you needed to tell me. And why didn't you leave any sort of words for Kakashi? Caught that, did you? Minato winked. When you tear the gate down, I will get a minute of freedom, the minute that I intended to use to seal the Kyuubi. Last words, if you will. If anyone could use those, it's Kakashi. I will try not to leave you empty-handed, either. I'm just an echo, but I know a few tricks. You'll know what I mean after I'm gone. Naruto took a deep breath. So, this is it? Yes. Naruto tensed. Alright. Goodbye, Dad. He tore down the tiny piece of paper and the gust of wind tore at the gate. They shattered and fell down, irreparably broken, and Minato took a step towards him. Another. Nothing stopped him this time, and he ruffled Naruto's hair, before he wrapped him in a brief hug. Live long and always listen to your heart. And then he was not there anymore, vanishing in a whirlpool of chakra. Naruto's eyes flickered open, and he stared momentarily, confused. The Sharingan was gone. Only one eye of Kakashi's was staring at him in pure terror, shaking him ever so slightly. Clearly the boy was unwilling to touch him too strongly, considering all the bandages. Naruto's hand moved by itself, touching down firmly on top of Kakashi's silver bundle of hair. Then, it ruffled them. The gesture was so familiar, yet at the same time, so incredibly alien. Naruto couldn't have imagined how he would have ever gotten the idea to do so. "Sensei?" Kakashi's voice echoed strangely in the small room. "Do you need me to call help?" He looked pained. "I get in trouble, but I am alright." Naruto felt his own voice answer with a certain degree of calmness that he did not have. "Kakashi, have you been skipping out on sleep again? I can tell." Kakashi grumbled something under his breath. Naruto didn't catch it. His lips started to move once again, and Naruto felt that if he wanted, he could have stopped the whole thing, cut the thread, yet he didn't. He just let it. Felt incredibly weird, incredibly wrong, but he could bear it, for his father. "You keep dreaming of her," the shade of Minato said through his son. "It is not your fault. You need to stop beating yourself up about it. You had your time of pain and regret. She was the one who made the choice. And Rin held to that choice until the very end. You can't blame her for remaining truthful to herself. Nor can you keep blaming yourself for your own choices. Why are you telling me this?" Kakashi asked, a few tears running down from his eye, and his Hite-8 looked suspiciously moist, too. "No one is immortal, Kakashi. You know that even more than some others. I will not be able to watch over you like I'd like to. I need you to get your head straight." But Naruto let his hand ruffle the hair one last time. Inside he felt weird, restrained. Whatever effect his father's specter had, it was fading fast. "The war took away your childhood." Naruto felt his voice cracking and started helping the process, by guessing at what his father wanted to say. "You need to take a moment for yourself and try to find what you are missing, to break the limits you have set with your beliefs. Please, Kakashi, live for me if not for yourself. Don't speak like you're going to die." With that one sentence, Naruto's vision of Kakashi shattered. Gone was the extremely competent yet extravagant shinobi. In his place, for the short while, there was Kakashi, the 14-year-old boy, afraid for the life of his last friend and teacher. Everyone dies. We shinobi just get to choose how. And then, there was nothing. Minato was gone. Kakashi, Naruto called the name the same way his father had, with a hint of compassion and sadness, but a moment, he wondered what he should say. He could not just come out and tell the boy that his sensei had he could not tear the boy's hope apart, not here, not now. What came out was, "I'll take care of you, I promise." Minato-sensei, Kakashi leaned forward, gave the shortest hug in the history of short hugs, and then jumped back, putting on his black fabric mask once again. Naruto did not have the time to marvel over the fact that he had seen under it for the first time. "Thank you," the teen said, and there was a pause. "You're not going to tell anyone that I broke the rules, are you?" Naruto smiled tiredly. "Those who break the rules are trash, isn't that right, Kakashi? But those who abandon their comrades are worse than trash." He gestured weakly to the door. "I don't remember seeing anyone." Kakashi saluted shortly. "I will wait until you're healed up, then." Naruto looked a little troubled at that prospect, but kept his comments to himself. There was a knock from the other side of the door at that moment. 5 minutes have passed, came a muffled warning from outside. "Oh." Kakashi jumped like he had just been hit. "Guy, we're leaving," he shouted through the door. He picked up the anbu, dusted off his vest a bit, and straightened the animal mask. "There, good as new." He dragged the anbu to the door, and he revealed his Sharingan once more. He was very careful not to look Naruto directly in the eyes. "Get well, sensei," he said softly as the door closed behind him. Naruto was alone.